The first thing that hit the floor was the coffee mug. Then came May Carter. Deputy Victor Harrow's hand was still raised when the diner went silent, 30 people staring at the linoleum, at their plates, at anything except the woman crumpled against the counter with blood on her lip and humiliation burning in her eyes. Cedar Ridge, Texas. 7:12 in the morning, cold enough to see your breath through cracked window glass. Nobody moved. Then a chair scraped, slow, deliberate, like the sound of something ancient and dangerous pulling itself upright. The gray-bearded man at the counter didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Because outside, through frost-filmed glass, 12 Harley engines were still running, and every single one of them sounded like a warning. Hotat. Hey, if you're watching this, stay with me until the end, because this story is going to hit you somewhere deep. Hit that like button, drop a comment, and tell me what city you're watching from tonight. I read every single one. Now let's get into it. The diner had no name worth remembering anymore. The sign above the door used to read Carter's in red neon, but the second R had burned out 3 winters ago and nobody came to fix it. Now it just said Cha Tees, blinking half-hearted through the cold, and somehow that felt right, like the place itself had given up trying to be whole. May Carter had repainted the walls twice in the last 5 years, patched the vinyl booths with electrical tape, replaced the cracked tiles under the grill with mismatched ceramic squares that didn't quite line up. She kept the lights bright. She kept the coffee fresh. She kept showing up at 5 in the morning when the darkness outside Cedar Ridge felt like something physical pressing against the glass. She kept showing up because stopping meant admitting she'd lost. And May Carter did not know how to lose. It was the one thing her husband Daniel had always said about her. Not as a compliment exactly, more like a man describing a force of nature he loved and feared in equal measure. You're going to outlast everything, May. You're going to outlast me. He'd been right about that, though not in any way either of them had planned for. Daniel Carter had been dead 4 years. A heart attack at 43 that came without warning and left May with a diner, a mortgage, a daughter in college 300 miles away, and the particular loneliness of a woman who'd built her entire life around someone who was no longer there to share it. She managed. That was the honest word for it. She didn't thrive. She managed. The breakfast rush on a Tuesday in January ran thin. A couple of highway truckers at the counter, old Pete Dunmore in his usual corner booth nursing his first cup of the day, a young woman named Carla who waitressed part-time between shifts at the gas station. The cold had kept most people home. A weather system had blown in overnight from the Panhandle, and the temperature had dropped 12 degrees by dawn, leaving Cedar Ridge under a pale gray sky that promised nothing good. May was refilling Pete's coffee when the cruiser pulled into the parking lot. She didn't need to look up to know whose it was. She recognized the engine, a particular rattle in the idle, aggressive, and slightly too loud, like the man who drove it. She set the pot down carefully, straightened her apron, kept her face neutral. Victor Harrow came through the door like he owned the air inside it. He was third-generation law enforcement in Cedar Ridge County, and he wore that inheritance the way some men wore a scar. Visibly, intentionally, as a reminder of what they were capable of. 41 years old, thick through the shoulders, with a jaw that hadn't softened since high school, and eyes the color of dirty creek water. His grandfather had been sheriff. His father had been sheriff. Victor was currently deputy, which was either a step down or a patient man's strategy, depending on who you asked. In Cedar Ridge, you didn't ask. He didn't sit. He never sat, not when he came in. Sitting was what customers did, and Victor Harrow had never considered himself a customer. Morning, May. She was already moving toward the coffee. Victor? Cold one. She poured his cup without being asked because she'd learned 3 years ago that making him wait for it extended the visit, and shorter was always better. She set it on the counter and turned back toward the grill. Heard you called the county assessor's office again, he said. May kept her back to him. The property tax filing has an error. I've told them that twice. They told me you were being difficult about it. I was being accurate about it. She heard the stool scrape, heard him pick up the cup, heard him set it down again without drinking. The small sounds of a man deciding something. You know, Victor said, it would be real easy for an error like that to turn into something bigger. Audit, compliance review, Health department's been meaning to do a sweep of older establishments in the county. May turned then. She looked at him directly, which she'd learned not to do for a long time and had recently decided she needed to relearn. Is that a threat, Victor? It's a concern. He smiled. It didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. I'm looking out for you, May, same as always. She was 47 years old, and she had been looking into that smile for 3 years, and she still felt the cold of it somewhere behind her sternum. Not fear, exactly, though fear was in there, deep and familiar. More like the knowledge of a trap you can see clearly and still can't get out of. She turned back to the grill. The blow came without sound or warning. His hand caught the back of the coffee mug she'd been reaching for, and the mug went one way, and his forearm went another, and then something connected with her shoulder hard enough to spin her. She hit the counter, grabbed it, slid sideways, and came down on one knee against the linoleum with the crack of bone on tile that was loud enough to make Pete Dunmore flinch 3 tables away. The coffee spread across the floor in a slow, dark wave. The mug lay in pieces near the far wall. The diner went absolutely silent. May was on one knee, with her palm flat on the cold floor and blood from her lip. She must have caught the counter edge on the way down, dripping in a thin red line onto the tile. She could feel 30 separate people deciding not to look at her. She could feel Carla, at the far end of the room, pressing herself against the wall. She could feel old Pete Dunmore's eyes fixed on his coffee cup, with the particular concentration of a man pretending to be somewhere else entirely. She had been here before. Not like this, not this direct. Victor was usually more careful, usually preferred intimidation that didn't leave marks. But she recognized the position, the floor, the silence, the weight of a room full of people choosing not to see. She was breathing. That was something. She was thinking clearly, which was something else. She told herself both of those things while the blood dripped, and the cold air from the still open door turned the spilled coffee into something that smelled like burnt iron. She was starting to push herself upright when she heard the chair. It wasn't dramatic. It was just a sound. Wooden legs on linoleum, slow and deliberate, the way you'd move something when you weren't in a hurry and didn't need to pretend you were. From the far end of the counter, where she hadn't really registered a customer sitting because she'd been focused on Victor, a man stood up. He was not tall in the way that demands attention. He was tall in the way that makes you recalibrate the room around him. Gray-bearded, heavily built through the shoulders, wearing a leather vest over a dark flannel with a patch on the chest she couldn't read from the floor. His face was the kind of face that had been through weather. Not aged exactly, but compressed, like something that had been under pressure for a very long time and learned to hold its shape. His eyes were on Victor. Victor, to his credit, didn't flinch. He turned slowly, deliberately, the smile still arranged on his face, though something behind it had shifted. "Help you?" Victor said. The man at the counter said nothing. He picked up his coffee cup, drank from it unhurried, set it back down. Then he stepped over the counter stool and walked toward the center of the diner and crouched down in front of May and offered her his hand. Not a dramatic gesture, not performed for the room, just a hand extended, palm up, the knuckles scarred and the grip steady. May took it. He helped her to her feet without effort, steadied her when she swayed slightly, then stepped back one pace and turned to face Victor. He still hadn't spoken. "This doesn't involve you," Victor said. "I'm sitting in her diner," the man said. His voice was low, unhurried, with a southern current somewhere underneath it that had been smoothed almost flat by years of other places. "That makes it my breakfast. You interrupted my breakfast. Walk away, old man. Finish your coffee, deputy. Then go." The words were so calm they were almost nothing, almost just air. But the room had changed. May could feel it, the pressure of 30 people simultaneously holding their breath. Victor looked at the man. Then he looked out through the diner's frost-filmed front windows at the parking lot. His jaw moved once, like he was chewing something bitter. Whatever he saw out there, May couldn't tell from where she was standing, altered the arithmetic of the moment. He picked up his coffee, drank, set it down, looked at May with an expression she'd seen before and hoped never to see again, one that said, "This isn't finished, this is just paused." Then he walked out. The bell above the door rang his exit. The cruiser engine turned over in the parking lot, tires on gravel, receding, gone. The diner didn't immediately exhale. It took a few seconds, like the room itself didn't trust the silence. May became aware that she was gripping the counter with both hands. She made herself let go. The man had gone back to his stool. He was looking at his coffee cup. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, didn't look up. She got a cloth from behind the counter and crouched down to start cleaning the spilled coffee. Her knee was throbbing where she'd hit the floor. Her lip had stopped bleeding, but the skin was tight and swollen on one side. She worked methodically, the way she did everything, focused on the immediate task because the immediate task was manageable and the larger situation was not. It was Pete Dunmore who finally said something, quietly, to the tabletop. "You ought to be more careful, May." She stopped cleaning, looked up at him. He still wasn't meeting her eyes. "Yeah," she said. "I know." She finished cleaning the floor. She made a fresh pot of coffee. She brought it out and refilled every cup in the room without speaking, and nobody spoke to her, and that was fine. That was Cedar Ridge. That had always been Cedar Ridge. The man at the counter was still there at 8:15 when the morning quieted down, and Carla was restacking menus in the corner, and Pete Dunmore had finally shuffled out into the cold. May refilled his cup without asking, and he glanced up at her. "Ronan Creed," he said. "May Carter." "I know." He looked out the window. "Your name's on the building." "Half of it." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, just a small adjustment, like a door opening an inch. He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. Outside, she could see now what she hadn't registered clearly before: the motorcycles in her parking lot. 12 of them parked in a loose formation, their riders leaning against them or sitting on them in the cold, all of them wearing the same vest. "Iron Wolves," she read from the patch on his chest. "Never heard of them." "We don't advertise much. Where are you from?" "Everywhere." He looked back at his coffee. "Headed west. Stopped for weather." She almost left it there. She almost just took the coffee pot back and let the morning continue. But something about the stillness of him, the way he sat with that particular quality of a man who has learned to take up exactly the space he needs and no more, made her stop. "He'll be back," she said. "Victor, he's always back." Ronan looked up at her. His eyes were dark gray, nearly colorless in the diner light, and they held something she recognized after a moment as the specific weight of a person who has looked at very bad situations for a very long time and stopped being surprised by any of them. "I know," he said. "Then you should leave." She said it evenly, not unkindly. This town has a way of making things worse for people who get involved. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked out at his bikes, looked back at her. "What's the rate on a room?" She blinked. "Excuse me?" "Closest motel." "What do they charge?" "The Pine View's about 2 miles out on Route 9. "Why?" He finished his coffee, set the cup down, pulled a 20 from his jacket and slid it across the counter without waiting for the check. "Because the weather's not going anywhere," he said. "And neither am I." Nah. The Iron Wolves took 4 rooms at the Pine View Motel, which was the kind of establishment that had stopped pretending to be more than functional sometime in the early 90s. The sign outside buzzed in the cold. The carpet in the rooms was the color of old moss. The heaters worked if you kicked them twice in the right place. Ronan sat on the edge of his bed at 10 that night and looked at the photograph he kept in his jacket's inner pocket. He looked at it the way some men drink, carefully, with full knowledge of what it cost him and no intention of stopping. The photo was of a young woman, early 20s, dark hair, laughing at something outside the frame. Written on the back in her handwriting, "Dad, stop making that face, I'm fine." She hadn't been fine. She'd called him 6 times in the 3 days before she died. He'd been deployed. He'd been out of signal range. He'd been doing what soldiers do, which is follow orders and trust that the world holds together while they're gone. She'd called the police twice. She'd called the county crisis line. She'd called her mother, who told her she was being dramatic. She had not been dramatic. The coroner had called it an accident. Ronan had read the report 17 times in the year after, picking it apart sentence by sentence, and the word that kept snagging in his mind was concluded, as in, it was concluded that. Not proven, not established, concluded. The way you conclude something when you've decided what you want the answer to be before you start looking. He put the photograph back, lay back on the bed with his boots still on and stared at the water-stained ceiling. Through the wall, he could hear Dex, 28 years old, 2 tours, the newest member of the Wolves and the one Ronan had been watching most carefully in the past year, cleaning his boots. The methodical scraping sound of a man who needed his hands to be doing something. Ronan understood that. His phone vibrated. The message was from Brick, who was outside, who was always outside when he couldn't sleep, which was often. Local PD just ran your plates. All of them. Ronan read it twice, set the phone on his chest. So Victor Harrow didn't waste time. He lay still for another few minutes, listening to the heater rattle and the wind outside doing something violent to the motel's gutters. Then he swung his legs off the bed and pulled on his jacket and went out into the cold. Brick was leaning against the covered walkway railing, a cigarette going, watching the road. He was 53, built like a concrete block, with a beard that had gone entirely white in the year after his wife died. He'd been with Ronan since the beginning, since before the club had a name, since the two of them were just 2 retired Marines with bad knees and worse sleeping habits, trying to figure out what to do with the rest of their lives. Harrow family, Ronan said, not a question. Sheriff Harrow Sr. ran this county for 22 years. Brick's cigarette traced an arc in the dark. Victor's been deputy 9 years. Father had a stroke 2 years back, retired. Victor's been running the department functionally since then. Waiting for the election. He exhaled. Runs a clean face. Nobody officials ever made anything stick. Unofficially, Brick was quiet for a moment. Benny Alvarez ran an auto shop on the south end of town. Refused to pay what amounted to a protection arrangement with the county. Shop burned 6 months later. Electrical, officially. Another drag. There's a woman named Sandra Pruitt, school teacher, filed a complaint against a deputy after her nephew got beaten up during an arrest. Complaint disappeared. She doesn't talk about it anymore. Won't say why. Ronan looked out at the dark road. The temperature had dropped further. The night was the kind of cold that settled into old injuries and reminded you of exactly where each one lived. And May Carter? Husband died 4 years ago. Left her the diner. From what I can piece together, she's been a problem for them since about a year after that. Some county contractor husband had that they tried to redirect after he was gone. She wouldn't sign off on it. It escalated from there. Brick ground out the cigarette under his boot. She's stubborn. Yeah, Ronan said. I noticed. Ronan. Brick said his name the way he always did when he was about to say something Ronan wasn't going to like. We've got places to be. I know. This isn't... I know what it isn't. He turned his collar up against the wind. Give me a couple of days. Brick looked at him for a long moment in that way he had. Steady, patient, the look of a man who'd watched Ronan do things that made no strategic sense and turn out to be exactly right, and also things that made no strategic sense and cost them dearly. He was calculating which category this was going to fall into. 2 days, Brick said finally. Ronan nodded, went back inside. He lay on the bed again, and this time he slept because he'd learned how to sleep in difficult places, and this was the least difficult place he'd been in a while. But before sleep took him, in the thin gray space between waking and under, he thought about May Carter on the floor of her diner, one knee down, blood on her lip, looking at nothing with the expression of a person who has absorbed so much that they've learned to absorb as a survival strategy. He thought about his daughter. He thought about the 6 missed calls. He thought 2 days might not be enough. She came in at 5 the next morning, and he was already at the counter. She stopped when she saw him. Something moved across her face. Not quite relief, not quite alarm, more like the involuntary recalibration of someone who has stopped expecting certain things and doesn't know immediately how to process their reappearance. You stayed, she said. I said I would. She went to the grill, started the coffee. He sat in silence while the diner filled with the first sounds of the day, the pop of the fryer, the hiss of the coffee maker, the particular acoustics of a small space coming awake. When she brought his cup, she didn't go back to the grill right away. He went to the county last night, she said. Victor. I have a friend who works in the admin office. She called me. May set the coffee pot down, leaned against the counter. He's trying to get my operating license flagged. Some compliance thing. He moved fast. He always moves fast when he's angry. She looked at Ronan. What are you still doing here, Mr. Creed? Ronan? Ronan. She said it like she was deciding something. Why? He drank his coffee, set the cup down, looked at the counter for a moment. Tell me about him, he said. Victor. All of it. Not what's safe to say. What's true. May was quiet for a long time, long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. The cold light coming through the front windows caught her face, the swollen place on her lip, the tiredness under her eyes that was too structural to be just one bad night. She looked like a person who had been carrying something for years and had simply gotten very good at making it look like nothing. Then she started talking. What? She talked for 40 minutes, through the early trickle of customers and 2 more pots of coffee, keeping her voice low and steady while she moved around the diner, filling cups, handing out plates, doing the 1,000 small tasks of the morning. Ronan listened. The Harrow family had been Cedar Ridge's power structure for 3 generations, she said, not exclusively, not overtly, but in the way that water controls the shape of a valley over time. Invisible if you weren't looking, everywhere if you were. They didn't run every business or control every vote. They didn't need to. They just needed to be present at every threshold where something could go wrong for someone and be the person who decided whether it did. Business licensing, property assessments, building permits, zoning variances, contract awards, ordinance enforcement. The machinery of a small Texas county was surprisingly extensive when you laid it out, and the Harrows had, over 3 generations, placed themselves in or adjacent to almost every lever. Danny Ortega had run a restaurant on the main strip for 12 years. When he got into a dispute with a county official over a drainage easement that cut through his back property, his health inspection scores suddenly started coming back problematic. Unusual findings, items that passed 1 year and failed the next. He'd sold and left. The Feldman family had owned a hardware store for 30 years before they supported the wrong candidate in a county commissioner race. The building they'd been trying to buy for expansion somehow fell under a historical preservation designation that hadn't existed the previous year. They'd sold the store within 18 months. Sandra Pruitt's nephew, May said his name was Joel, 19 years old, black kid from the south end of town, had been pulled over on a county road for a broken taillight and ended up in the hospital with 3 broken ribs and a fractured wrist. Sandra had filed the complaint. The complaint had required her to submit supporting documentation to a county office. That documentation had included her school employment records, which she'd provided as proof of her identity and residency. 3 months later, her school got an anonymous complaint about her classroom conduct. The investigation had lasted 6 months. She'd been cleared, but the damage to her career and her spirit had been decisive. Nobody goes to the state? Ronan asked. Marcus Webb did, 2 years ago. He had documentation, actual documentation, photographs, dates, names, financial records. He'd been building a case for over a year. May refilled his cup without looking at him. His house had a fire the week before he was supposed to meet with an investigator from the AG's office. He and his family got out. The documentation didn't. Silence. He leave town? Marcus? A pause. Marcus is still here. He's at the VFW hall most evenings. She met Ronan's eyes. He's the one who told me I should talk to you, actually, this morning. I called him after I saw your bikes. Ronan set his cup down slowly. He knows who we are? He said he recognized the patch. Said he saw Iron Wolves at a rally in Amarillo 4 years ago. She held his gaze. He said you helped somebody there. He didn't say how. Ronan looked out the window. The morning had gotten grayer, the sky pressing down close to the rooftops. Wind was moving through the parking lot, pushing a paper cup across the asphalt in small, irregular arcs. He thought about Amarillo. He thought about the woman there, what her name had been, what condition she'd been in by the time they'd gotten involved. He thought about how that situation had ended and whether ending was even the right word for something that mostly just eventually stopped. He thought about what it cost a person to stay in a place like Cedar Ridge, year after year, absorbing what May Carter had absorbed, while the machinery ground on around them, and the exits all had prices on them. He thought about his daughter, about 6 missed calls, about the word concluded. Tonight, he said, VFW Hall. Ronan, I'm not asking permission, he said. Not unkindly. I'm telling you where I'll be. She looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression that she didn't quite manage to control. A small, involuntary loosening, like a person who has been holding tension for so long that the moment someone acknowledges it, the body doesn't know what to do. She turned back to the grill. The coffee's on the house, she said. The VFW hall smelled like every VFW hall Ronan had ever been in. Beer and old wood, and the specific kind of institutional grief that comes from rooms full of people who have experienced things that don't translate into ordinary conversation. Photographs on the walls, unit patches in frames, a flag in a display case that had been folded with ceremony and locked away and still somehow managed to be the most present object in the room. Marcus Webb was 51 years old, compact and careful in his movements, with gray in his close-cropped hair and the kind of stillness that comes from having been through something catastrophic and surviving it with your judgment intact. He'd served 2 tours in Iraq, come home, started a contracting business that had grown steadily for 9 years before Victor Harrow's machinery had found a use for it. He sat across from Ronan at a corner table with a beer he wasn't really drinking and looked at the Iron Wolves patch on Ronan's vest for a long moment before he said anything. I heard you were still in the area, Marcus said. You heard right. Victor's going to move fast. He doesn't let things sit. I know. Ronan leaned forward, forearms on the table. Tell me about the documentation, the fire. How much of what you had is gone? Marcus's jaw moved. He picked up his beer, set it down. Not all of it, he said quietly. Ronan looked at him. The physical copies burned, but I'd scanned most of it. Sent it to a secure account. Marcus looked at the table. Didn't tell anybody. Even my wife didn't know. I was afraid that if anyone knew it still existed, they'd find another way. He exhaled. I've been sitting on it for almost 2 years. Didn't know what to do with it. Every official channel I can identify, Harrow has something in. State was my one shot, and after the fire, He stopped. You got scared, Ronan said. Not accusatory, just naming it. Marcus met his eyes. Yeah. That's the rational response, Ronan said. They hurt your family. Rational people reassess. Something in Marcus's posture shifted. The small adjustment of a man who'd been waiting to be judged and was recalibrating around the absence of it. What are you thinking? Marcus asked. I'm thinking you need channels they don't have reach into. Ronan picked up his own beer. I know some people. Federal level. People who have their own reasons to be interested in county-level corruption in West Texas. Marcus was very still. That's a big move. Yes. You do that, there's no pulling back. They'll know it's coming. They'll come after May. They'll come after everyone who's connected to this. I know. You willing to be here for that? For all of it? Ronan drank, set his glass down, looked at the flag in the display case across the room, the careful fold, the ceremony of it, the way someone had put it away with intention, as if the intention itself was the point. I'm willing, he said. Marcus looked at him for a long time, long enough that the bar noise around them cycled through 3 different conversations and a woman laughed at something near the door, and the heater clicked on and off once. Then I'll send you the files, Marcus said. Ronan nodded, reached for his jacket. His phone was already out. He had 3 messages from Brick, all variations on the same concern. He put the phone away without answering them. Outside, the cold had deepened into something absolute, the kind of night where the stars were so clear they looked surgical. He stood for a moment in the parking lot of the VFW hall and breathed the cold air and felt the familiar convergence of things. The point where a decision made elsewhere catches up with the moment you're standing in, and you recognize that you were always going to end up here, that every road you took in every year previous was just the long route to this parking lot, this cold, this specific wait. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a number he didn't recognize. Cedar Ridge area code. He answered. Silence on the other end. Then, I know who you are, Creed. I know what the Iron Wolves did in Amarillo. I know why you're still in Cedar Ridge. Victor Harrow's voice was quiet and level in a way that was worse than anger. I'm going to give you one opportunity to make a smart decision. Ronan said nothing. May Carter's license application has about 8 problems I've been patient about. I stop being patient tomorrow morning. A pause. The Pineview Motel has a structural inspection coming up. 4 of those rooms might not pass. Another pause. One of your guys, the young one, dark jacket. He's got a warrant out of Midland County, failure to appear. I checked this afternoon. Ronan was very still. I want you gone by morning, Victor said. All of you. And I want the woman to understand that her friends don't help her. They make things worse. The line went quiet but didn't disconnect. Ronan looked up at the stars. He was thinking about Dex. 28 years old, 2 tours, cleaning his boots through the motel wall because his hands needed something to do. He was thinking about a warrant that may or may not be real, and how long it would take to find out, and how long it took a corrupt deputy in a county he controlled to manufacture paperwork if it wasn't. He was thinking about May Carter at 5 in the morning, starting the coffee with her back to the door. He was thinking about his daughter's handwriting on the back of a photograph. I'm fine. Victor, he said. A beat. We're not leaving. He ended the call. For a long moment he stood in the cold parking lot with the phone in his hand and the stars overhead and the sounds of Cedar Ridge at night. Wind, a dog somewhere, a truck on Route 9, the distant and irregular pulse of a town that had learned to live with something wrong in its chest. Then he typed a message to Brick. Get everyone inside. Lock the rooms. Don't open your door for a knock you're not expecting. He was already walking back to his motorcycle when his phone lit up with a message from an unknown sender. A forwarded text, no words, just a photograph. The parking lot of the Pineview Motel. His bikes. Taken 20 minutes ago from close range, someone had been watching them. And whatever happened next was not going to be a warning. The photograph was still on his phone screen when Ronan pushed through the door of room 4 and Brick looked up from the chair he'd been sitting in with his jacket still on and his boots still laced, which meant Brick had been waiting, and Brick only waited like that when he already knew something was wrong. Ronan held the phone out. Brick looked at it. His face didn't change. It rarely did, which was either his greatest strength or his most expensive habit, depending on the situation. How long ago? 20 minutes? Maybe less? Brick stood. Dex. Yeah. The warrant real? Don't know yet. Ronan set the phone down on the bureau and looked at it like it was an object he didn't fully recognize. Could be manufactured, could be real, and something Dex never mentioned. Either way, Victor knows about it, which means he's been running checks since yesterday morning. Brick walked to the window, moved the curtain aside with 2 fingers, and looked out at the parking lot. The bikes were still there, dark shapes under the motel's weak exterior lighting, frost already forming on the gas tanks. He let the curtain fall. We're exposed out here, he said. I know. The motel owner's going to fold the second anybody in a uniform shows up and asks questions. That's not a criticism. That's just what people do. I know that too. Brick turned. His expression was the one Ronan had been anticipating since the VFW parking lot. Not angry, which would have been easier, but the specific expression of a man who is being very deliberate about not saying the thing he most wants to say. Go ahead, Ronan said. I told you 2 days. You did. It's been 36 hours, and we've already got a deputy sheriff who has our plates, our names, and apparently enough reach into Midland County's system to pull warrants on our people. Yes. Ronan. Brick sat back down, put his forearms on his knees. I'm not walking away from a woman in trouble. You know I'm not, but I need to understand what we're walking into. Because right now it feels like you've made a decision and the rest of us are finding out about it in stages. The room was quiet. The heater ticked. Somewhere outside, wind moved through the parking lot and one of the bikes shifted slightly. Just the weight settling, but it sounded for a moment like something waking up. Marcus Webb has documentation, Ronan said. Digital. Survived the fire. 2 years of financial records, incident reports, correspondence. Enough to build a federal case if it gets to the right people. Brick was very still. And I know someone at the FBI field office in Dallas, Ronan continued. Agent named Carver. We did him a favor in San Antonio 18 months ago. Not the kind of favor you forget. He picks up when I call. You've already called him. Not yet. But you're going to. Yes. A long silence. Brick looked at the floor, then at his hands, then at Ronan. Does May know you're planning to escalate to federal? Not yet. Does she get a vote? Ronan opened his mouth, closed it. That was the question with the weight in it, the one he'd been carrying since the VFW parking lot without fully letting himself look at it. She gets told, he said, tonight. That's not the same as a vote. No, Ronan said. It isn't. Brick exhaled through his nose, stood again, moved to the door and put his hand on it. I'll get the others, he said. You need to talk to Dex first, alone, before the group. He was gone before Ronan could answer. Dex was in room 7, which was at the far end of the walkway, which was where Dex always positioned himself, near exits, away from centers of noise with clear sightlines to the parking lot. Old habit, the kind that doesn't switch off because you've been stateside for 3 years. He answered the knock immediately, which meant he hadn't been sleeping either. He was 28 years old with dark circles that had been there since Ronan met him, and a way of holding his shoulders that suggested someone who had learned very early to make himself smaller in spaces where he wasn't sure of his welcome. He'd come to the Wolves through a VFW chapter in El Paso. Someone had pointed him at Ronan and said this kid needs something to belong to that won't get him killed. Ronan had spent 6 months figuring out if that was true before he'd let him prospect. He stood in the doorway and looked at Ronan and said nothing. Midland County, Ronan said. Dex's jaw moved. His eyes went to a fixed point somewhere to Ronan's left. A tell that Ronan had cataloged months ago and filed under this is where the thing he won't say lives. Failure to appear, Ronan said. Tell me. A long pause. The wind came through the walkway, and Dex's eyes watered slightly. Cold, just cold, though it was hard to be certain. Child support hearing, Dex said. 8 months ago. Ronan waited. I've got a daughter. The words came out flat, practiced flat. The tone of someone who has rehearsed saying something so many times, it stopped sounding like information and started sounding like a recitation. She's 4. Her mother and I, we were never... He stopped, started again. I didn't know about the hearing. I was in New Mexico. I didn't have a fixed address at the time, and the notice went to an old apartment. He finally looked at Ronan. I'm not running from it. I didn't know. Have you dealt with it since? I've been trying to contact the court. It's complicated. When you don't have an address, when you're... He exhaled. When you're living like we live, the system doesn't make it easy to... Do you send money? Every month, cash, to her mother's account. Does her mother know where you are? She knows I'm with the club. She doesn't know the town. Ronan stood in the cold doorway and looked at this young man who had a daughter he didn't see and a warrant he hadn't known about, and shoulders that had been carrying something for longer than the Wolves had known him. He felt, without wanting to, the particular ache of recognition, the specific frequency of a person doing damage to themselves out of misunderstanding rather than intention. I should have told you, Dex said. The flatness had broken slightly. Something underneath it now, quieter and more honest. I know I should have told you. Yes. Are you... He stopped himself. Am I what? Dex looked at him. Sending me home. The question sat in the cold air between them. Ronan let it sit. No, he said finally. But we're going to get this resolved. Tonight, if I can manage it. I have a lawyer contact in Amarillo who owes me a call. He paused. And Dex, next time you're carrying something that has legal weight, you tell me before someone else does. Dex nodded. His throat moved. And your daughter, Ronan said. We'll figure that out too. The address situation. The court. Something happened in Dex's face that he didn't have the architecture to control. A small, involuntary fracture, there and gone in under a second. He nodded again, sharper this time, and looked away. Get some sleep, Ronan said. He turned and walked back through the cold. They met in room 4, all 8 of them, which meant chairs pulled from walls, and two men sitting on the floor, and the heater working harder than it was designed to, and the room smelling like leather and cold air, and the particular density of 8 people who trusted each other in ways they mostly couldn't articulate. Ronan stood at the foot of the bed and looked at them. Brick was by the window. Dex was near the door. The others, Sal, who was 55 and had a prosthetic left hand he'd lost to an IED outside Fallujah. Tommy, who was the youngest after Dex and the loudest and the most likely to make the wrong call for the right reasons. Ghost, who nobody called by his given name anymore, and who communicated primarily through expressions and didn't volunteer information unless it was essential. Hector and Ren, who had been riding together since before the club, and moved through every situation in an unconscious coordination that Ronan had learned not to question. And Lou, who was 61 and the oldest and had been a combat medic, and still wore that identity like it was a physical object. He told them everything: Marcus's documentation, the federal contact, Victor's call, the photograph, Dex's warrant, which Dex received by looking at the floor, not looking up until 3 people had looked away from him. Nobody interrupted. When he finished, Tommy said, "So we're doing this." "I need to know if anyone has a reason not to," Ronan said. "Family exposure, legal situation, anything that makes staying a problem." Nobody spoke. Because once we push this to federal, there's no walking it back. Victor Harrow becomes a man with nothing to lose. That makes him more dangerous, not less. He'll look for leverage. Any leverage. That means anyone connected to us, anyone connected to May, anyone he can use. Still nothing. Ronan looked at Brick. Brick looked back at him steadily. "You already knew what we'd say." "I needed to hear it anyway." "Then you've heard it." Brick turned to look at the bikes through the window's frost-filmed glass. "What do we do tonight?" "Shift rotation. 2 on the bikes, 2 watching the building. Victor knows where we are and he's already watching. We return the favor." He paused. "Lou, I need you to go see May in the morning before she opens. Don't come to the front door, back entrance. She needs to know what's happening before we make any calls." Lou nodded once. He never needed things repeated. "Ghost." The man looked up. "I need eyes on the sheriff's department. Not close. Just a read on traffic. Who goes in and out and at what time, whether there's any pattern change from the baseline." Ghost nodded. "Everyone else, normal. Coffee. Don't cluster. Don't make it look like a war council." He looked around the room. "Because it's not one. Not yet." He let the sentence land, let everyone hold it for a second. "Get some sleep," he said. "What's coming won't wait for tired people." Me called him at 6:15 in the morning, before Lou arrived, before the sun came up enough to qualify as morning rather than the dark gray that passed for it in January. He answered on the second ring. "Someone tagged my back door," she said. Her voice was level, but her breathing wasn't quite. "Spray paint, it's just a shape, like a circle with a line through it." "When?" "Overnight. I don't know when exactly. I came in at 5 and it wasn't there, and I just went out to check the propane and..." A pause. "It's on the dumpster, too." Ronan was already reaching for his jacket. "Don't open for business yet. I have orders to..." "May." He said her name the way he had to say it occasionally. Not loud, just direct, the way you address something that needs to hear it. 10 minutes. "Can you give me 10 minutes?" A pause that said she didn't like it and was going to do it anyway. 10 minutes, she said. He got there in 8. The spray paint was a crude red circle crossed with a diagonal slash. Not quite a standardized symbol, but close enough to various things that its meaning was clear in a way that transcended specifics. It was on the metal back door, and on the dumpster, and on the corner of the building where the alley turned. 3 separate marks, which meant either multiple people or one person moving quickly and deliberately. May was standing in the back doorway with her arms crossed, and her breath coming in small white puffs in the cold. She'd seen it before he got there, and she'd had time to arrange her face, which meant what he was looking at now was the managed version. He photographed all 3 marks, crouched near the one on the dumpster, and looked at it more closely. Fresh. He could smell the paint still, faint but present in the cold air. "What does it mean?" she asked. Means someone wanted you to know they were here. He stood. Classic intimidation. Make you feel watched. I already feel watched. Now they want you to know you feel watched. He looked at her. Is there a reason your back entrance doesn't have a camera? She looked at the door. Something crossed her face. Not embarrassment exactly, more the specific expression of someone confronting a precaution they didn't take, because taking it would have meant admitting what they were afraid of. I have one in the front. We're going to change that today. He put his phone in his jacket. I need to tell you some things. Come inside. She made coffee, because she made coffee the way some people breathed, as a response to existing in a situation, as a way of keeping her hands in contact with something manageable. He sat at the counter and watched her work and waited until she set the cup in front of him and leaned against the back counter with her own cup, arms still crossed, watching him with the expression of someone who is braced. He told her about Marcus's files, about the federal contact, about what escalating to that level would mean in practical terms. The response time, the exposure, the likelihood that Victor Harrow would identify what was happening before it was complete and would act on that information. She listened without interrupting. She was good at listening, better than most people, in the way that people are who have learned that what other people don't say is often more important than what they do. When he finished, she looked at her coffee for a long time. This puts everyone who's spoken to you at risk, she said. Yes. Marcus, Sandra Pruitt, anyone else you've talked to in the last 2 days. I know. Do they know? Marcus does. I haven't spoken to Sandra directly yet. She looked up. Victor has people watching her house. Has had on and off for 2 years. She told me once, just once, in a moment I don't think she meant to have, that she finds notes on her car sometimes. Nothing threatening in words. Just notes. I saw you at the grocery store. Nice coat. Things that say we see you without saying anything actionable. Ronan was still. She has 3 kids, May said. Her oldest is 15. She coaches his soccer team. The coffee was hot, and he drank it anyway. Let it settle. I can't make this decision for anyone, he said, including you. What I can tell you is that the alternative is what you already have, which is Victor Harrow with more confidence every year and fewer people willing to be in the same room as you. May set her cup down, turned and looked out the small window above the sink at the alley wall, the gray morning, the particular bleakness of a January day in a town that had been grinding her down for 3 years. My daughter's coming home in March, she said to the window, for spring break. She doesn't know about any of this. I've kept it. I've made sure she doesn't know. Ronan said nothing. This goes sideways. If it gets worse before it gets better. She stopped, turned back. Her eyes were dry and her jaw was set, and she was looking at him with something he recognized from a long time ago, from a different context, from men in the moments before they agreed to do something they understood the full cost of. My daughter's name is Lynn. She's 20 years old and she's studying environmental science, and she thinks her mother runs a boring diner in a boring town and has a boring life. Okay, Ronan said. If anything happens to me, I need someone to tell her the truth. Not a version of it. The truth. He held her gaze. Nothing's going to happen to you. You don't know that. No, he said. I don't. But I need you to trust that I've done this before and I know where the lines are. Have you won before? He looked at her. He thought about Amarillo. He thought about San Antonio. He thought about a situation 3 years ago in New Mexico that he still didn't discuss with anyone, and that had ended with 2 men in the hospital and a family safely relocated, and Ronan sitting in a motel parking lot at 2 a.m. feeling something he could not name and still could not. Mostly, he said. She picked her cup back up, looked at it. Call your federal contact, she said. Agent Dana Carver answered on the first ring, which meant he'd been expecting the call, which meant someone had already said Ronan's name to him, which was either reassuring or alarming, and Ronan hadn't decided which. He was sitting in his room at the Pine View at 9 a.m. with the curtain half open and the parking lot visible and the sounds of Brick and Sal moving around on the walkway outside. Creed, Carver said. Carver. You're in Cedar Ridge. News travels. Cedar Ridge County is on a list we've been watching for about 18 months. Quietly. A pause. Where did you get eyes on it? Stopped for weather. He kept it simple. I've got a contact with documentation, 2 years old but intact. Financial records, incident reports, correspondence, the full anatomy of a county-level corruption network. Who's your contact? I'll tell you that when I know what kind of protection you can offer. A pause. Carver was a careful man. That was both his most valuable quality and his most frustrating one. He processed information fully before responding, which meant conversations with him had a particular rhythm of silences that could read as hesitation, but were actually something closer to architecture. If the documentation is what you're describing, Carver said slowly, and if your contact is willing to cooperate and testify if necessary, this becomes an organized crime and corruption investigation, which means resources I don't have sitting in a field office. How long to spin up? Realistically, to do it right? 3 weeks? Maybe 2 if the documentation is clean. We don't have 2 weeks. What's the urgency level? Ronan thought about the spray paint on the back door, about Sandra Pruitt and the notes on her car, about Dex's warrant materializing in Victor Harrow's hands within hours of the plates being run. Victor Harrow knows we're here, and he knows we're asking questions, Ronan said. He's already started applying pressure. The escalation timeline is his, not mine. Can you protect your people? Mine, yes. The civilians we're dealing with, that's a different question. Another of Carver's architecture silences. Send me the documentation, he said. Not to my bureau email. I'll text you a number. A pause. And Creed, be careful about what you do before I can get eyes on this formally. If you create a legal problem for us, the documentation becomes harder to use. I know how this works. I know you do. That's why I'm saying it. A beat. Watch yourself. The call ended. The text came through 30 seconds later. An encrypted transfer number, a second contact number, brief instructions. Carver's efficiency, when he decided something was worth his efficiency, was one of the few things Ronan found genuinely reassuring. He forwarded the information to Marcus. Marcus responded in 4 minutes. Files will be uploaded within the hour. Ronan sat back, looked at the ceiling, listened to the parking lot. It was in motion now. That was both the relief and the danger. Things in motion had their own momentum, their own logic, and they didn't always stop where you intended. His phone buzzed. Unknown number, different from the one Victor had used the night before. He answered. Mr. Creed? A woman's voice. Older, careful. My name is Patricia Harrow, Victor's mother. Ronan was completely still. I think we should talk, she said. Before this goes somewhere that hurts people who don't deserve to be hurt. Mrs. Harrow, I know what my son is. I have known for a long time. Her voice was steady in the way of someone who has rehearsed. But there are people in this family who are not Victor. A wife, 2 children. I need you to understand that what you're doing has a radius. What I'm doing is going to destroy this family. I understand that. I'm not asking you to stop. A pause. I'm asking you to listen to me first, because I have something you need, something I should have given someone years ago and didn't because I was afraid. Ronan's hand tightened on the phone. There's a name, Patricia Harrow said quietly. A name you don't have. A name that explains where the money goes, who Victor answers to, and why every investigation has stopped exactly where it has for 22 years. Her breath was audible for a moment. Victor isn't the top of this. He never was. He's the face. What's behind him? She stopped. Mrs. Harrow. Meet me, she said. Tonight, not at anything official, somewhere neutral. The room was very quiet. Why now? Ronan asked. Why tell me this now? A long pause. Long enough that he thought the connection had dropped. Because I had a daughter, Patricia Harrow said. Her voice had changed. The rehearsed steadiness was still there, but something had cracked along one seam of it, just slightly, just enough. She died 8 years ago. The official cause was an accident. Ronan stopped breathing. I know what you lost, she said. And I know why you're in Cedar Ridge. And I know it isn't just about May Carter. The silence that followed was the kind that changes the shape of a room. Outside, one of the Harleys shifted on its kickstand in a gust of wind, and the sound of it was low and resonant and traveled through the motel wall like something alive. And Ronan sat with the phone pressed to his ear and the ceiling overhead, and the knowledge, cold and absolute, that this had just become something much larger than he'd understood when he walked into a roadside diner and helped a woman off the floor. Victor Harrow wasn't the architect of 22 years of fear. He was the instrument, and somewhere above him, holding the blueprint, was a name Ronan didn't have yet, a name that Patricia Harrow had been living with for 8 years like a stone in her chest, and was only now, at the edge of everything, finally willing to speak. "Where?" Ronan said. Patricia Harrow gave him a location. An old feed store on the county line, closed for 3 years, set back from the highway behind a stand of dead oaks. She said 9 o'clock. She said come alone. She said if she saw more than one motorcycle, she would leave and never call again. He said he'd be there. The line went dead. Ronan sat with the phone in his hand for 2 full minutes without moving. The heater ticked. The wind pressed against the motel window. Outside, Brick's boots scraped the concrete walkway in a slow patrol pattern, back and forth. The rhythm of a man who had been keeping watch for decades, and whose body did it now, the way other people's bodies breathed. He thought about what she'd said. I had a daughter. She died 8 years ago. He thought about his own daughter, the photograph in his jacket, the handwriting on the back, 2 dead daughters, 2 fathers, no, a father and a mother, carrying the same impossible weight on opposite sides of the same broken system. The symmetry was too precise to be accidental and too painful to look at directly. He called Brick in. Sab. Brick listened without expression. When Ronan finished, Brick walked to the window and stood there for a long time, looking out at the parking lot where the morning had turned the frost on the bikes into something that caught the weak light and threw it back in small, cold splinters. It's a trap, Brick said. Maybe. You're going. Yes. Brick turned. She said alone. I know what she said. And you believe her. A Harrow. Ronan looked at his hands. They were resting on his knees, palms down, and he studied them for a moment as though they contained information he hadn't yet accessed. The scars across the knuckles, the calluses from handlebars and rope, and all the other objects a life like his had required him to grip. She knew about my daughter, he said. Not what happened. The shape of it. The specific shape. That means she's been looking at me the same way I've been looking at her family. Or Victor told her to set this up. Victor doesn't know about my daughter. Nobody in Cedar Ridge does. Brick was quiet. Then Marcus could have... Marcus knows I lost someone. He doesn't know the details. Nobody here does. He looked up. Nobody except the VA records and whoever's been running background on me deeper than a county deputy can manage. That landed. He watched Brick process it. The slight adjustment in his posture, the way his eyes moved to a middle distance that wasn't in the room. Brick was recalculating. Patricia Harrow has resources, Brick said slowly. Her husband was sheriff for 22 years. Her son runs the department. Yes, she has resources. And she used them to look into you, specifically, before making this call. Which means she's been planning this for a while. This isn't impulse. She's been watching and waiting, and something about our arrival pushed her over whatever edge she was sitting on. Brick exhaled, leaned against the wall. I don't like it, he said. You don't have to like it. I do have to keep you alive. Ronan stood, picked up his jacket. I'll have my phone on. Open line. You and Sal park half a mile out on the access road. If you don't hear from me by 9:30, you come in. Brick looked at him for a long beat. Something moved behind his eyes. Something that wasn't tactical. Something older than strategy. The particular concern of a man who has been watching his closest friend walk toward damage for years and has never once been able to talk him out of it. 9:30, Brick said. Not a minute later. Dumb. The feed store was exactly what she'd described. A low cinder block structure set back from the county road behind a row of dead oaks whose branches clawed at the January sky like hands reaching for something that wasn't there anymore. The parking area was gravel, cracked, and weedy, with a single exterior light mounted above the entrance that cast a yellow cone into the cold dark. A sedan was parked near the entrance, no other vehicles. Ronan killed the engine and sat on the bike for a moment, letting the silence settle. The night was very cold. His breath made shapes in the air that dissolved before they were fully formed. He could hear the tick of the engine cooling, the wind in the dead oaks, and somewhere distant, half a mile out on the access road, the low idle of two Harleys that would have been inaudible to anyone who didn't know they were there. He went inside. The store had been gutted when it closed. Shelves removed, counter stripped, nothing left but the concrete floor and the cinder block walls and a few overhead fluorescents, two of which still worked, throwing hard blue-white light across the empty space. It smelled like dust and old feed and the particular cold of an unheated building in winter. Patricia Harrow was standing near the back wall, next to a folding table and two metal chairs that she'd brought herself. She was in her late 60s, thin, with silver hair cut short, and a face that carried its years with a kind of angular precision. Not worn exactly, but paired, like something that had been reduced to its essential structure. She wore a dark coat, no gloves, and her hands were clasped in front of her in a way that could have been composure or could have been the physical mechanism by which she was keeping herself together. She watched him cross the empty floor without speaking. He stopped 6 feet from her, close enough to talk, far enough to leave. "Mrs. Harrow?" "Mr. Creed." Her voice was smaller in person, not weaker, just scaled down, like a broadcast reduced to its source. "Thank you for coming." He didn't sit. She didn't offer. "You said you had a name," he said. "I do." She looked at the folding table. There was a manila envelope on it, thick, sealed. She put her hand on it, but didn't push it toward him. "But before I give it to you, I need you to understand what it means, what it actually means. Because once you know this name, the thing you're doing here, the investigation, the documentation, the federal contact, all of it changes." "I'm listening." She exhaled, looked at the floor, then at the wall, then at him. "My husband, Earl Harrow, was sheriff for 22 years. You know that. What you don't know, what no one outside this family knows, is that Earl didn't build the system that runs Cedar Ridge. He inherited it." She paused. "Let that settle. There's a man named Judge Calvin Price. He sits on the 10th District Court of Appeals. He has sat there for 19 years. Before that, he was a county judge in this district for 11 years. Before that, he was a prosecutor." She met Ronan's eyes. "Calvin Price built what you see in Cedar Ridge. Not my husband, not my son. Price. 30 years ago, when this county was nothing but ranch land and oil leases, Price identified a way to turn local governance into a revenue system. He recruited my husband. He designed the network of county offices, contracts, and enforcement mechanisms that the Harrow name would operate. And he positioned himself above it, in the judiciary, where he could protect the entire structure from any legal challenge that might reach it." The fluorescent light buzzed. Ronan didn't move. Every time someone filed a complaint, every time a case started building, every time a state investigator got close enough to be a problem, her voice had gone very steady, the rehearsed quality back in full, but underneath it, something was laboring. Price handled it. From the bench, through procedural mechanisms, through case assignments, through the quiet machinery of a court system that most people never look at closely enough to understand. "A sitting appellate judge," Ronan said. "Yes." The word echoed slightly in the empty building. "And Victor knows." Victor has known since he was 25. Price recruited him the same way he recruited Earl, showed him the system, showed him his place in it. She pulled her hand back from the envelope but didn't step away from the table. "My son is a violent, controlling man. I stopped pretending otherwise a long time ago. But what you need to understand is that Victor is also a tool, a very effective tool, but a tool." "And your daughter," Patricia Harrow went still, the kind of still that has mass, that takes up space in a room. She looked at the wall to her left, and her jaw tightened, and for a moment Ronan saw the architecture of her face do something it probably hadn't done in front of another person in years. It shifted, just slightly, just enough to show the structure underneath the composure, which was grief, plain and terrible, and undiminished by time. Rachel, she said. What happened to Rachel? Rachel was the one who was going to talk. The words came slowly. She'd found documentation, not financial, not what Marcus Webb found. Something else. Communications between Price and Earl, going back years. She'd found them in her father's study after his stroke, and she'd understood immediately what they meant. Patricia's hands had separated. One was gripping the edge of the table. She called me first. I told her to be careful. I told her to wait. She stopped. She didn't wait, Ronan said. She went to Victor. Patricia's voice had dropped to something barely above the fluorescent hum. She thought he might not know. She thought her brother would be horrified, that they would handle it together as a family. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of something Ronan could feel against his skin, the specific gravity of a truth that has been kept in a sealed room for years and is now, for the first time, meeting open air. Victor told Price, Ronan said. Patricia nodded. One small movement, precise. The movement of a woman who has nodded at this truth inside her own mind 10,000 times and is only now doing it where someone can see. 3 weeks later, Rachel's car went off a bridge on County Road 14. Single vehicle, no witnesses. The investigation was handled by Victor's department. By Victor personally. Her grip on the table edge was white-knuckled. He signed the accident report. He closed the case. He attended the funeral. He carried the coffin. Ronan's chest was doing something he didn't have a name for. Not the physical sensation of grief. He knew that one intimately, knew its topography the way a man knows a road he's driven too many times. This was something else. This was the recognition of a pattern, the terrible rhyme of it. Daughters who called for help, systems that refused to hear them, men who signed paperwork and called it concluded. He looked at the envelope on the table. What's in there? Copies of the communications Rachel found. I took them from her apartment after she died before Victor could clear it. I've kept them in a safe deposit box in another county for 8 years. Her eyes were dry, but her breathing had changed. Shorter, more controlled. The breathing of someone managing a physical response. They establish a direct, documented relationship between Judge Calvin Price and Earl Harrow spanning 14 years. Financial arrangements, case interventions, specific instructions regarding the handling of complaints and investigations, names, dates, amounts. And you've held this for 8 years. The question landed hard. He didn't cushion it. He couldn't. She looked at him directly. Yes. Why? Because I was afraid. Of Victor. Of Price. For the first time, something broke through the composure that wasn't grief. It was fear, present tense, alive. The fear of a woman who had been living with a specific danger for 8 years and had never once been free of it. Victor is what you see. Price is what you don't. Victor breaks things with his hands. Price breaks things with paper. And paper is forever, Mr. Creed. Paper can follow you anywhere. Paper can rewrite what happened to you. Paper can make your daughter's death an accident and make it stay an accident until everyone who remembers her is gone. The fluorescent buzzed. The cold pressed in from the walls. Ronan stepped forward and picked up the envelope. It was heavy, heavier than he'd expected, the weight of 14 years of documented corruption compressed into paper and ink and photographs. I need to ask you something, he said. Ask. When this goes to the FBI, because it's going tonight, your name will be attached to it. You'll be a witness, possibly a defendant, depending on how prosecutors view your 8 years of silence. I know. Victor will know. I know that too. Price will know. She didn't flinch, but something shifted behind her eyes, a small, involuntary adjustment, like a person bracing for an impact they can see coming and cannot avoid. I've made arrangements, she said. My other son, Daniel, Victor's younger brother, lives in Vermont. He doesn't have anything to do with this. Never did. He left when he was 18 and didn't come back. A pause. I'll be with him by tomorrow morning. And Victor's wife and children? The question seemed to cost her something. She closed her eyes briefly. Marlene doesn't know what her husband is, not fully. The children are 7 and 9. Does she have family? Her parents are in San Antonio. Get her out, Ronan said. Tonight. before Victor finds out about this meeting, before Price has any indication that his name is in play. I can't make Marlene. You don't have to make her do anything. You just have to tell her enough of the truth that she understands moving her children is the smart thing to do while their father is under federal scrutiny. He held the envelope against his chest. Can you do that? Patricia looked at him. He watched her calculate. The mechanics of a woman weighing the possible against the necessary. The way she'd been weighing things for 8 years. Except this time the equation had changed because the variable she'd been missing was standing in front of her in a leather vest with a patch on the chest that said Iron Wolves. Yes, she said. Tonight. Tonight. He turned toward the door, stopped. Your daughter, he said, without turning back. Rachel. The communications she found, was that all she had, or was there something else? The silence behind him had a quality to it, a density, a specific weight, that told him before she spoke that the answer was yes. Rachel kept a journal, Patricia said, detailed, daily, from the time she started finding the documents until she stopped. Until the end. I don't have it. I looked for it after she died. Victor's people cleared her apartment, and I couldn't. Her voice finally broke, just slightly, just along one edge. It's gone. Or someone has it. Victor. Or Price. Or someone working for Price. I don't know. Ronan stood with his back to her and the envelope against his chest and the cold of the empty building pressing in from every direction. A journal. A dead woman's journal, documenting in real time the unraveling of a corruption network and the last weeks of her life. In someone's hands. A weapon, or a trophy, depending on who held it. Thank you, he said, for all of it. He walked out into the cold without looking back. Must. He was halfway to his bike when his phone rang. Brick's number. Don't go to the motel, Brick said. His voice had changed. Not panicked, Brick didn't panic, but compressed, the way it got when information was coming in faster than he could process it into decisions. Deputies just pulled up. 3 cruisers. They're searching the rooms. Ronan stopped. The gravel crunched once under his boot, and then he was still, standing in the yellow cone of the exterior light with the envelope in his hand and the January cold wrapping around him. Who's inside? Dex and Ghost. Everyone else was on shift or out. Warrant? They're not showing one. They're telling the motel manager it's a welfare check. Where are you? Access Road. Half-mile out, like you said. Sal's with me. Ronan looked at the envelope. Looked at his bike. The night was very dark beyond the cone of light, and the dead oaks were making sounds in the wind that were close to human without being recognizable. Call Lou, he said. Tell him to get to Maze. Right now. Back entrance. If they're searching our rooms, they know we're connected to her and the diner's next. Ronan, do it! He could hear Brick breathing on the other end, the faint growl of the Harleys idling in the background. What's in the envelope? Brick asked. Everything. A pause. Define everything. A sitting appellate judge, 30 years of systemic corruption, the murder of a Harrow family member to protect it, everything. The line was quiet for 3 full seconds. Where do we go? Brick asked. Ronan looked out at the county road, dark in both directions. The motel was southeast, the diner was east, and in every direction there were roads controlled by a system that went higher than any of them had imagined when they'd stopped in a small Texas town for weather 3 days ago. Marcus Webb's place, he said. He's got a garage behind his house, off the main road, separate entrance. We regroup there. And the stuff in the rooms? Clothes and road gear. Nothing operational. Nothing that matters. Dex and Ghost, if they're smart, they'll cooperate with whatever the deputies are doing and walk out clean. There's nothing in those rooms that constitutes evidence of anything. A beat. Call Hector and Wren. Have them pull surveillance off the sheriff's department and get to Marcus's. He paused. And Brick. Yeah. Call Carver, the FBI contact. Use the encrypted number. Tell him everything just accelerated. He ended the call. Got on the bike. The engine came to life under him with the sound that had been the only constant in his world for 20 years. the low, heavy vibration that traveled through the frame and into his bones and told his nervous system that he was moving, that he was in motion, that whatever was behind him could not hold him. He rode. Marcus Webb's garage was behind the house at the end of a gravel track, screened from the road by a line of weathered cedar fencing. Marcus had it open when Ronan arrived, standing in the doorway in a flannel coat with a flashlight and the expression of a man who had been expecting this moment for 2 years and still didn't feel ready for it. Ronan handed him the envelope without speaking. Marcus took it, looked at the weight of it, looked at Ronan. "What is this?" "Open it." Marcus set it on the workbench under the single fluorescent tube that lit the garage. Another buzzing fluorescent, another blue-white light turning everything clinical and shadowless, and broke the seal and spread the contents across the scarred wood surface. He read for 4 minutes without speaking. The garage was silent except for the fluorescent and the wind against the metal walls and Marcus's breathing, which changed incrementally as he moved through the pages. Faster at first, then slower, then something that wasn't quite steady. He looked up. "Judge Price." "Yes." "Calvin Price, 10th District Court of Appeals." "Yes." Marcus put both hands flat on the workbench. His head was down. He was breathing through his nose in a way that Ronan recognized, the specific respiratory pattern of a man controlling a rage response. When he looked up, his eyes were bright and hard, and his jaw was set in a configuration that was entirely different from the careful, measured man who had sat across from Ronan in the VFW hall 2 nights ago. "I testified in Price's courtroom," Marcus said. 6 years ago. Drunk driving case. I was a witness. He looked at me from the bench and..." He stopped, pressed his palms harder against the wood. "He's been sitting up there the whole time, watching all of it, running all of it." "Yes. And Victor's sister?" "Killed for finding out." Marcus closed his eyes. His hands on the workbench were shaking, a fine, controlled tremor, the kind that doesn't come from weakness, but from the effort of not doing something with them. "This changes everything," Marcus said. "I know. This isn't a county corruption case anymore. This is a federal judiciary issue. This is..." He looked at the documents. "This is RICO. This is organized criminal enterprise with a sitting appellate judge at the center. Carver's being contacted now. Carver's field office isn't going to be enough. This goes to the DOJ directly. Public integrity section. Maybe higher." "I know." Marcus looked at him. "Do you? Because what happens next isn't what you were planning for. What you were planning for was a local deputy with a corruption habit. What you've got now is a man who sits on a court that hears appeals from every federal district court in West Texas. A man who can influence case assignments, procedural rulings, evidence admissibility. A man who has been doing exactly that for 19 years. The garage door rattled. Wind. Both of them looked at it. Neither moved. "If Price finds out his name is in this documentation before federal agents have enough to move," Marcus said quietly, "he won't do what Victor does. He won't spray paint your building or threaten your business license. He'll do it with paper. He'll get an emergency order. He'll have this documentation sealed, classified, or challenged on chain of custody grounds before it ever sees the inside of a courtroom." He paused. "And then he'll handle Patricia Harrow the same way Rachel was handled." The words sat in the cold air of the garage like something physical. Ronan's phone buzzed. A message from Lou. "At the diner. May is here. She's okay. Deputies haven't come yet." Then a second message, 30 seconds later. A black sedan just passed the front of the building. Slow. Not a cruiser. Tinted windows. Didn't stop. Then a third. It came back. Passed again. Still didn't stop. Ronan showed Marcus the messages. Marcus read them, and his face did something Ronan hadn't seen before. A small, specific closing, like a door being shut from the inside. "That's not Victor," Marcus said. "Victor uses cruisers. Victor wants you to know it's him." "Then who?" Marcus looked at the documents on the workbench. Looked at Ronan. "Price knows," Marcus said. "He already knows." The fluorescent above them buzzed and flickered once. A brief interruption, half a second of darkness, Then the light returned. And in that half second, Ronan felt something shift in the room that wasn't physical, wasn't the light or the temperature or the sound of the wind. It was the architecture of the situation itself, reconfiguring around a new reality. They were not fighting a deputy. They were not even fighting a family. They were fighting an institution embedded in the judiciary, with 30 years of practice at making problems disappear. And it already knew they were here. His phone buzzed again, this time from Brick. Dex and Ghost are out. Deputies let them go. No charges, nothing confiscated. They're headed to your location. But Ronan, they took photographs, everything. Clothes, bags, personal items, even the trash cans. And they left the doors open. Every room, wide open. Not a search, a message. We were inside your world. Ronan put his phone in his pocket. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the documents spread across the workbench. 14 years of a dead woman's discovery. 8 years of a mother's silence. 30 years of a judge's architecture. All of it laid out under buzzing fluorescent light in a cold garage in a town that had been built on a lie so complete it had become the truth. He picked up his phone again and called Carver. It rang 4 times. 5. 6. Voicemail. He called again, same result. He called the encrypted backup number Patricia had never given him, but Carver had. A recorded message. This number is no longer in service. Ronan stood in the cold garage with the phone in his hand and the documents on the workbench, and Marcus watching him, and the wind outside doing something that sounded like a voice. And he understood, with the particular clarity that comes only at the moment of maximum exposure, that either Carver was compromised, or Carver was unreachable, or Carver had been positioned to be unreachable at exactly this moment by someone who understood the federal system well enough to know which lines to cut. A sitting appellate judge with 19 years on the bench. A man who handled things with paper. Marcus was looking at him, reading his face. He's not answering, Marcus said. Not a question. No. The backup number? Disconnected. Marcus sat down slowly on the metal stool near the workbench. He put his elbows on his knees and his head in his hands, and he stayed there for a moment while the garage hummed around them. We're alone, Marcus said. Ronan looked at the documents, looked at the garage door, looked at his phone, dark and silent in his hand, the last connection to a federal lifeline that had just gone dark at the worst possible moment. Not alone, Ronan said. Just exposed. His phone lit up. Not Carver. Not Brick. May. Victor just walked into the diner. He knows about Patricia. He's asking where you are. He has a gun on his hip and a smile on his face, and Ronan, there are 2 men with him I've never seen before, and they are not wearing badges. The phone was in his hand, and the night was outside, and the documents were on the table. And somewhere across Cedar Ridge, in a diner with a broken neon sign, a woman who had trusted him was standing across a counter from a man with a gun and 2 strangers, and the full weight of a system that had been killing and erasing people for 30 years. And every federal line was dead. And every official channel was dark. And the only thing between May Carter and what came next was a retired Marine in a leather vest standing in a cold garage with nothing but a stack of paper and a brotherhood of wounded men and the specific, terrible knowledge that the thing he had promised, I know where the lines are, had just been proven completely and irreversibly wrong. Ronan was on his bike before the thought finished forming. The engine caught, and the sound of it split the quiet of the gravel track, and he was moving. Not fast, not yet, but with the particular kind of forward motion that has already decided what it's going to cost and has agreed to pay it. Behind him, Marcus was on his phone, calling someone, his voice swallowed by the distance before Ronan hit the county road. He called Brick on the straight. Diner, now. All of them. What happened? Victor's there, with people who aren't his. May's inside. He heard Brick inhale once. Then the line went to engine noise. Brick relaying the order without hanging up, the sound of Harleys starting in the background. One after another, a chain reaction of ignition that traveled through the phone like a pulse. 5 minutes, Brick said. I'll be there in 3. He rode. The county road at night was a black ribbon with no center line, the headlight cutting a narrow tunnel through the dark, fence posts flickering past like ticks on a clock, counting down to something. The cold hit his face and his hands and the exposed skin at his wrists where the gloves didn't quite meet the jacket sleeves, and the pain of it was clarifying in the way that pain sometimes is. It reduced everything to velocity and direction and the single fixed point he was moving toward. He thought about nothing. That was a skill. That was a thing you learned in combat when thinking would slow you down and slowness would kill you. You let the body drive and the mind go to a place that was beneath thought, a place made of instinct and repetition and the accumulated weight of every situation you'd survived by not thinking about it first. The diner appeared at the edge of the headlight, the half-broken neon, the frosted windows, the parking lot with its familiar geography of cracked asphalt and faded lines. 3 vehicles. May's truck, a county cruiser, and a black sedan with tinted windows that Ronan recognized from Lou's description, parked at the far end of the lot, angled toward the exit like something ready to leave in a hurry. Lou's bike was behind the dumpster, dark, engine off. Ronan killed his headlight 50 yards out and coasted into the lot on momentum. He parked beside Lou's bike and swung off and stood for a moment in the dark, looking at the diner through the side windows. He could see them. Victor was standing near the counter, facing May, his body language loose and open in the way of a man who is enjoying the control he's exercising. His service weapon was holstered, but his hand rested near it with the casual familiarity of someone for whom the gun was less a tool than an extension of posture. 2 men stood behind him, both in dark jackets, no visible badges, no insignia, positioned with the specific spatial awareness of people who had done this kind of work before. Private security or off-books enforcement. Not deputies. May was behind the counter. Her face was composed in a way that Ronan recognized from the first morning, the managed expression, the survival expression, the face of a person who has learned to give nothing away because giving something away has a price. Lou was nowhere visible inside, which meant Lou was in position somewhere Ronan couldn't see, which was where Lou was best. His phone vibrated. Text from Lou. Back kitchen. Doors unlocked. She's been talking to him for 6 minutes, keeping him in front. She knows I'm here. Ronan looked at the text. 6 minutes. May had been standing across from Victor Harrow and 2 unknown men for 6 minutes, keeping the conversation going, keeping them positioned in the front of the diner, and she had done this knowing Lou was in the kitchen and trusting that Ronan was coming. 6 minutes of performance under the eyes of a man who had killed his own sister. He moved to the back of the building. The kitchen entrance was a metal door that opened into the prep area. Stainless steel counters, a walk-in cooler, the industrial exhaust hood over the flat top, and Lou, crouched behind the cooler door with his phone in one hand and the particular expression of a combat medic who has assessed the situation and is waiting for someone else to make the tactical call. 2 unknowns are armed, Lou said quietly. Left hip, both of them. Concealed but visible when they shift weight. Victor's got his service weapon plus something on his right ankle. May? Steady. She's been giving him nothing. He's getting frustrated. Ronan moved to the doorway that separated the kitchen from the front. He could hear them now. Victor's voice. Don't make this harder than it is, May. I'm asking a simple question. Where's the Marine? I don't know where he is. He had coffee this morning and left. Left where? I run a diner, Victor. I don't ask my customers for itineraries. A pause. Then Victor's voice changed, dropped lower, closer, the tone of a man leaning in. My mother called a number tonight that she shouldn't have called, from a location she shouldn't have been at, with a man she shouldn't have been talking to. Another pause. I need to know what she told him. I don't know what your mother does or who she talks to. You're lying. I've been in this diner since 5 this morning. The same as every morning. You know that because you know everything about my schedule. You've known it for 3 years. A chair scraped. Someone shifted weight. One of the unknowns cleared his throat. May. Victor's voice had gone very quiet now, the quietest it had been. I like you. I've always liked you. You're tough. That's admirable. But what's happening right now is bigger than tough. What's happening right now is the difference between a conversation and something else. Ronan looked at Lou. Lou looked back. Through the doorway, Ronan could see a narrow angle of the front, the edge of the counter, one of the unknown men's shoulders, and May's hands on the counter surface. Flat, still, her knuckles slightly pale against the laminate. "I'm going to walk out there," Ronan said. Quietly. Not a discussion. "He's got 3 guns between them." "I know. You're not armed." "I know that too." Lou looked at him with the expression that Ronan had seen on medics' faces before. The specific look of a man who understands triage and has identified a situation where the calculus is bad no matter which variable you change. "Brick?" Lou asked. 3 minutes out, maybe 2. "That's a long time." "Yes." Ronan straightened, adjusted his jacket, looked through the doorway one more time. May was still at the counter. Her hands hadn't moved, but her eyes, he could see them now, at the edge of his angle. Her eyes had shifted slightly toward the kitchen. Not obviously, not in a way that anyone watching her face would register as directional, but enough. She knew he was there. He stepped through the doorway. The diner went silent the way rooms do when the equation changes. Not gradually, not with a fade, but all at once. Every sound subtracting simultaneously until what's left is the fluorescent hum and the breathing and the almost inaudible creak of leather as the 2 unknown men adjusted their stance. Victor turned. His face went through 3 expressions in under a second. Surprise, which was genuine. Calculation, which was habitual. And something else, something colder, something that settled into the lines of his jaw and stayed there. Creed. Victor. "You've got timing." Victor's hand moved an inch toward his holster and stopped, not drawing, measuring. "I was just asking your friend here where you might be." "She told you the truth. She didn't know." Ronan walked forward slowly, not toward Victor, but toward the counter, where he pulled out a stool and sat down. A deliberate choice. A man sitting is a man not threatening. A man sitting is a man changing the geometry of a room. "Now you know." "I do." Victor looked at his 2 associates. A small signal, a shift of the chin, barely perceptible. Both men adjusted. One moved slightly left toward the far end of the counter. The other stayed where he was, but his right hand drifted to his jacket. "You met my mother tonight." "I did." "What did she give you?" Ronan looked at the counter, at the coffee maker behind it, silent at this hour. At the menu board on the wall with its prices written in May's handwriting, the letters slightly uneven in a way that spoke of a hand that had been doing this for years without help. "She gave me a name," Ronan said. The room changed again. Not the sound, the pressure, like a system recalibrating around a new piece of information. "What name?" Victor said. "You know what name." Victor was very still. His associates were very still. May, behind the counter, was very still. The diner existed for a moment in a state of perfect, terrible equilibrium. Every person in the room, holding position, holding breath, holding the specific knowledge that the next sentence would move them all in a direction that could not be reversed. "My mother," Victor said slowly, "doesn't know what she's talking about." "Your mother knows exactly what she's talking about, and so do you." Creed Calvin Price. Ronan said the name evenly, without emphasis, the way you'd state a fact that doesn't require decoration. 10th District Court of Appeals. 30 years. Architect of everything the Harrow family has operated, including the parts you'd rather not discuss, including Rachel. The name of his dead sister did something to Victor's face that nothing else had. The controlled expression cracked. Not all the way, not into anything as readable as emotion, but along one fault line, deep, the kind of crack that runs through a foundation and tells you the structure above it is not as stable as it looks. "Don't," Victor said. "Don't what?" "Don't say her name." Rachel Harrow found the documentation, went to her brother, trusted her brother. Ronan's voice was still level, still seated, still the geometry of a man who is not threatening. Her brother called Price. 3 weeks later, a car went off a bridge on County Road 14, and you signed the report. Shut up. You carried the coffin, Victor. Shut up! The shout hit the walls of the diner and bounced back. One of the associates stepped forward. May flinched. The first involuntary movement she'd made, a small backward step that put her against the back counter. Victor was breathing hard. His hand was on his weapon now, not drawing, but gripping, the knuckles white, the tendons in his forearm visible through the skin. And then, from outside, through the frosted windows, through the cold January night, the sound. Engines. Not one, not two. A series of them, arriving in staggered sequence, the heavy, distinctive rumble of V-twin engines turning the parking lot into something that vibrated. The sound grew and multiplied and settled into a collective idyll that was lower than speech and more communicative than language. Victor looked toward the windows. Through the frost, shapes, headlights, cutting through the dark, bikes pulling into the lot, men dismounting, the sound of boots on asphalt, Brick, Dex, Sal, Tommy, Ghost, Hector, Wren. All of them. Every iron wolf that had been in that motel 2 hours ago, now standing in a cold parking lot in formation, engines still running, the sound of them filling the diner like a heartbeat that had found a room to live in. The front door opened. Brick stepped inside. He didn't look at Victor. He looked at Ronan. "We're here," he said. Tommy came in behind him. Then Sal, then Dex, who positioned himself near the door with his back to the wall and his eyes on the two unknown men with the specific focus of someone who has identified the threats in the room and assigned himself to them. The two associates looked at each other, looked at Victor. The arithmetic of the room had changed. 3 against 1 had become 3 against 9, and the 9 were not civilians, not bystanders, not people who would lower their eyes and pretend to be elsewhere. "Victor," one of the associates said. "A warning." Victor didn't respond. He was looking at Ronan. His hand was still on his weapon. His breathing was ragged, shallow, the breathing of a man whose control system was overloaded and whose training was fighting his instinct. "There's a path out of this," Ronan said. He stood up from the stool, slowly. "You walk out that door, you go home. Tomorrow morning, you get a call from someone at the Department of Justice, and you make a decision about how much of the rest of your life you want to spend answering for someone else's architecture. You don't know. I know everything. Your mother made sure of that." He took one step forward. "Price built this. Your father operated it. You inherited it. And your sister died because she tried to stop it. Those are facts. Those are documented facts that are right now in the hands of people who are not me and cannot be reached by anyone in this county." A lie. The files were with Marcus, not yet with the FBI. Carver's line was still dark, but Victor didn't know that, and the truth of what Ronan was saying was close enough to what would be true within hours, if Ronan could get the files to the right hands, that the lie felt less like deception and more like acceleration. Victor's jaw worked. His eyes moved around the room, counting, assessing, the trained instincts of a man who had controlled every room he'd been in for a decade and was now standing in one where the control had shifted. "You think this ends it," Victor said. "You think this, what, some bikers and some paperwork and you've solved it?" "I think your sister solved it 8 years ago. Nobody listened." The words hit hard enough that Ronan saw the impact in Victor's body. A small, involuntary stiffening, the physical equivalent of a flinch that the muscles caught and converted into stillness. "Price will bury you," Victor said. His voice had changed again, quieter now, with something underneath the anger that was closer to the real geography of his fear. "You don't understand what he can do. He's got judges, prosecutors, federal contacts of his own. He's had 30 years to build a system that depends on you," Ronan said. "That depends on a local enforcer. On a county deputy who keeps people scared and keeps the machine running. Without you, Victor, the machine doesn't have hands." Victor stared at him. "Walk away," Ronan said. "Testify. Give the DOJ everything. Names, accounts, the operational structure. The things your mother doesn't know because only you and Price were in the room. Do that, and Rachel's death becomes something other than an accident that nobody questioned. You're asking me I'm asking you to do the thing your sister wanted you to do 8 years ago when she came to you with the truth, and you handed her to the man who killed her." The silence that followed was absolute. Victor's face did something Ronan had never seen a face do quite that way. It collapsed. Not dramatically, not the way faces collapse in movies with tears and sound. It collapsed inward, structurally, like a building whose supports have been removed simultaneously. And what was left was not the face of a corrupt deputy, or a violent man, or a tool of a 30-year criminal enterprise. What was left was the face of a brother who knew exactly what he had done, and had been carrying that knowledge every day since, and had built an entire architecture of rage and control to avoid ever having to look at it directly. His hand came off the gun. His shoulders dropped. He stood in the middle of the diner that smelled like old coffee and cold air and looked at nothing, and his breathing was the only sound in the room for 5 full seconds. Then his phone rang. Everyone heard it, the sharp electronic tone cutting through the silence like something from a different world. Victor looked at the screen. His face changed again. The collapse reversed, replaced by something worse. Not anger, not control. Fear. Pure and unprocessed, and visible in a way that Victor Harrow had probably not allowed since childhood. "It's Price," he said. Nobody moved. Victor looked at Ronan, and in that look was something Ronan recognized from the worst moments of his own life. The expression of a man standing at the exact intersection of every choice he's ever made, seeing clearly for the first time the total cost, and understanding that the next 10 seconds will determine whether the cost continues compounding or whether, finally, terribly, it begins to be paid. "Answer it," Ronan said, "and put it on speaker." Victor's hand was shaking. The phone rang again. He answered. He put it on speaker. The sound filled the diner. "Victor." The voice was calm, cultured, precise, the voice of a man who had spent 30 years controlling outcomes from behind a bench. "I understand you're having a difficult evening." Victor said nothing. "I've been informed that your mother has made some unfortunate decisions tonight, decisions that will need to be addressed." A pause. "I've also been informed that certain materials may have been distributed, materials that, if they reach the wrong hands, would require me to take steps I would rather not take." Ronan looked at Victor. Victor was staring at the phone in his hand like it was a live wire. "I need you to recover those materials, Victor. Tonight, and I need you to resolve the situation with your mother, permanently." The word hung in the air. "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" The diner was motionless. "Victor?" "I understand," Victor said. His voice was barely audible. "Good. Call me when it's done." The line went dead. The silence in the diner after the call was the loudest silence Ronan had ever heard. It had texture. It had weight. It pressed against the windows and the walls and the people standing in it. Victor looked up from the phone. He looked at Ronan. He looked at May. He looked around the room at the men in leather vests who were watching him with the particular attention of people who have just heard a judge order a man to kill his own mother. "He wants," Victor started. "We all heard what he wants," Ronan said. Victor's hand with the phone dropped to his side. Something was happening in his face that was beyond expression. It was geological, tectonic, the shifting of plates that had been locked in position for years. "I can't," Victor said. "No," Ronan said. "You can't. I know what he'll do." "You don't," Victor's voice cracked. "You don't know what he's... There are people, everywhere. He has... Then help us stop him." The words landed in the room and stayed there, vibrating, living, filling the space between the two men who stood facing each other across a diner floor, stained with 3 days of history and decades of damage. Victor Harrow, the deputy, the enforcer, the tool, the brother who had traded his sister's life for his own survival, looked at the phone in his hand, looked at the men around the room, looked at May Carter, who was standing behind the counter with tears she hadn't allowed herself running silently down her face. He set the phone on the counter. "What do you need?" he said. They moved fast because fast was the only speed left. Victor talked for 22 minutes straight, standing in the center of the diner with every Iron Wolf and May and Lou listening. He talked the way men talk when a dam breaks. Not organized, not structured, but torrential. Everything coming out in the order it lived in rather than the order that made sense. Names, accounts, properties, shell companies. The specific mechanisms by which Judge Calvin Price had built and maintained a corruption network that extended from Cedar Ridge County into 3 adjacent counties and up through the state judiciary into federal territory. Brick recorded every word on his phone. Dex was at the front window watching the parking lot. Tommy was at the back door. Ghost was somewhere outside. Nobody had told him to go outside. He'd simply gone, the way Ghost did things, silently, without instruction, filling the role the situation required. When Victor stopped talking, Ronan looked at Brick. "Get that to Carver," he said. "Every number we have. His bureau line, his personal cell, the field office switchboard. If he doesn't answer, call his supervisor. If they don't answer, call Washington. I don't care who picks up as long as they have a badge." "What about the documents?" "Marcus has them. I'm going to get them, physically. No more digital. No more trusting systems that can be shut down." He turned to Victor. "Where's Price right now?" "His ranch, 20 miles northwest. He stays there when he's not in Austin." "How many people does he have?" "2 full-time, private, ex-law enforcement." Victor's voice had leveled out. Whatever internal collapse had occurred was still visible in his face, but his training had kicked back in. The particular autopilot of a man who knows how to function inside a crisis. Because crisis was where he'd always lived. "He'll have called them already." "Armed?" "Always." Ronan looked at the room, at his brothers, at the men who had followed him into Cedar Ridge for weather and were now standing in a diner at midnight preparing to confront a sitting federal judge with the resources to make all of them disappear. "Nobody goes to that ranch," he said. "That's not how this works. We don't go to him. We bring the evidence to people who can." He looked at Brick. "That's the mission. Get the files to federal hands. Everything else is protection. May, Marcus, Patricia, Victor's family." "Ronan?" It was May. She stepped around the counter and stopped in front of him. Her face was wet and her jaw was set, and she was looking at him with something that was neither fear nor courage, but the specific compound of both that exists in a person who has finally stopped managing their situation and started living inside it. "I can get Carver," she said. Everyone looked at her. "When Agent Carver did the work in San Antonio, my cousin's husband was part of that investigation. Luis Reyes. He's retired DEA. He has Carver's his personal number. Not the bureau, not the field office. The one that doesn't go through any system." Ronan stared at her. "Why didn't you?" "Because I didn't know we needed it until right now. I didn't know Carver was involved until you told me 2 hours ago. And I didn't connect the name until Victor started talking about the San Antonio connection." She was already pulling out her phone. "Give me 5 minutes." She walked into the kitchen. The door swung behind her. Ronan looked at the room, looked at Victor, who was standing with his arms at his sides and the expression of a man who has just detonated his own life and is standing in the blast radius watching the pieces come down. "Dex," Ronan said. "Yeah." "Take Victor's weapons, all of them." Victor didn't resist. He unholstered his service weapon and set it on the counter, reached to his ankle and produced a compact revolver, set it beside the first. Dex collected them without a word. "His people," Ronan said, nodding toward the 2 associates who had been standing near the wall for the entire exchange, silent, motionless, the particular stillness of men who are recalculating their employment status. "Who are you?" The one on the left, older, heavy-set, with a face that had seen institutional work, spoke first. "Private contract, hired through a firm in Dallas." "Price's firm?" "We don't get told the client name." "You just got told. What's your move?" The 2 men looked at each other. The older one looked at Victor. Victor said nothing. "We walk out," the older one said. "Right now. You never saw us." "Leave your weapons on the counter." They did. 2 pistols, placed carefully, handles toward the room. Then they walked to the door and Dex stepped aside and they went out into the cold and a car engine started and headlights swept the parking lot and they were gone. The kitchen door opened. May came back. "Luis is calling Carver on the private line right now," she said. "He'll have him call you directly within 15 minutes. 15 minutes. That's what he said. Ronan looked at his phone, looked at the clock on the diner wall, which was shaped like a coffee cup, and had a small crack in the glass that he'd never noticed before but now seemed like the most specific object in the room. "We wait," he said. They waited. 12 minutes. The longest 12 minutes Ronan had experienced since a night in a forward operating base in Helmand Province when mortar fire had stopped, and the silence afterward was worse than the impact because silence meant they were adjusting aim. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. Creed, Carver's voice. Tight, controlled, but real. I've been shut out of my own systems for the last 2 hours. Someone flagged my access. I'm calling you from a gas station in Waco on a phone I bought 20 minutes ago. Price. Has to be. He's got reach into the Bureau's administrative layer. I don't know how deep, but deep enough to flag my credentials and lock my case files. A pause. What do you have? Everything. Patricia Harrow's documents, Victor Harrow's testimony, recorded, names, accounts, operational structure going back 30 years, and a sitting deputy who just heard a federal judge order him to kill his own mother on speakerphone in front of 9 witnesses. The line was quiet for 3 seconds. Say that last part again. Calvin Price called Victor Harrow and instructed him to permanently resolve the situation with Patricia Harrow, on speaker, recorded, in a room full of people. That's... Carver stopped. Started again. That's not county corruption. That's not even RICO. That's solicitation of murder of a federal witness by a sitting judge. Yes. I'm coming to you. Where are you? Carter's Diner, Cedar Ridge, Route 9. I'm 90 minutes out. Don't move. Don't let Victor Harrow leave. And Creed, the documents, the physical documents, have them in hand when I arrive. Everything needs to go into an unbroken chain of custody starting tonight. I'll have them. 90 minutes. The call ended. Ronan looked at the room, at Brick, at May, at Victor, at the clock on the wall. Marcus, he said to Brick, I need those documents here, now. Brick was already moving. Ronan turned to the window. The parking lot was full of Harleys, their shapes dark and solid in the cold. Their engines off now, but their presence unmistakable. 12 machines that had carried 12 men into a town they had no obligation to and were still here, still present, still standing between the people inside this building and what was coming for them. 90 minutes. He looked at May. She was leaning against the counter with her arms crossed, and her face still wet, and the particular posture of a woman who has just watched the architecture of her fear reorganize itself around a different possibility. Not safety, not yet, but the existence of a path toward it that hadn't been there an hour ago. Make coffee, he said. She almost smiled. Not quite, but close. She went to the machine and started a fresh pot, and the sound of it, the familiar gurgle, the hiss, the smell of grounds hitting hot water, filled the diner with something that was the closest any of them had been to normal in 3 days. Outside, the wind moved across the parking lot. Somewhere northwest, 20 miles away, a man in a ranch house was waiting for a phone call that wasn't coming. And in the diner, under lights that had seen fear and silence and complicity for 3 years, a group of wounded men and a woman who had outlasted everything sat together and waited for the law to arrive. And the coffee brewed, and the clock ticked, and the Harleys stood in the cold like sentinels. And for the first time since Ronan Creed had walked into this place and helped a woman off the floor, the darkness outside the windows felt like something that had an edge, a boundary, a place where it stopped and something else began. The coffee was ready at 12:41 in the morning. May poured 9 cups without asking who wanted one because everyone did, and she knew that the way she knew most things about the people in her diner, through observation, through the accumulated evidence of small behaviors repeated, through the particular intelligence of a woman who had spent years reading rooms in order to survive them. Ronan took his cup and stood near the front window and drank and watched the parking lot. The cold had deepened into something beyond temperature. It was structural now, part of the night itself, turning every surface into something that reflected the weak light from the diner's windows and made the Harleys and the lot look like they were made of dark glass. The frost on the windshields was thick enough to be opaque. Inside, the waiting had its own texture. Brick was at the corner table with Victor Harrow, going through the recorded testimony point by point, clarifying names, dates, account numbers, the specific bureaucratic architecture of 30 years of corruption. Victor answered in a voice that was flat and continuous, the voice of a man who had opened a valve and was letting everything drain without trying to control the flow. Brick's phone sat between them, recording. Dex was at the front door. He hadn't moved from that position in 20 minutes. His eyes were on the parking lot, and his body was still in the way that Ronan recognized from men who had spent long hours in positions where movement meant being seen, and being seen meant dying. Whatever tribunal was happening inside Dex regarding his own secrets, the daughter, the warrant, the things he hadn't said, it was happening silently and in parallel with the vigil he was keeping. Lou was checking the kitchen exits for the third time. Tommy was sitting on the floor near the counter with his back against the wall, doing something with his hands that might have been cracking his knuckles or might have been trembling. Sal was beside him, not speaking, his prosthetic hand resting on his knee in the way it did when he was tired, angled slightly outward, as if even the artificial part of him needed to exhale. Ghost was outside. Somewhere, doing whatever Ghost did. Hector and Ren were at the far end of the diner, sitting across from each other in a booth, not talking, just present in that synchronized way they had. Two men whose proximity to each other was itself a kind of communication. Marcus arrived at 12:58. He came through the back entrance with a duffel bag that he set on the counter with the care of a man handling something volatile. He unzipped it. The manila envelope was inside, along with a laptop, 2 USB drives, and a spiral-bound notebook that Ronan didn't recognize. "What's the notebook?" Ronan asked. Marcus looked at it. His expression changed. Something passed through it that was close to disbelief. "Sandra Pruitt brought it to my house 30 minutes ago," he said. "She's been holding it for 6 years. She didn't tell anyone." Ronan looked at the notebook. Blue cover, spiral-bound, the kind you'd buy at a pharmacy for $3. "It's Rachel Harrow's journal," Marcus said. The room went quiet. Even Victor, at the corner table, stopped talking. He turned his head and looked at the notebook on the counter, and his face did something that was beyond reading. It went blank, then full, then blank again, cycling through responses that his nervous system couldn't settle on. "Sandra found it," Marcus continued, his voice low. "In the parking lot of the county courthouse, 3 days after Rachel's death. In Rachel's car, which had been towed there from the bridge. Sandra was at the courthouse for an unrelated matter, and she saw the car, and she knew Rachel. They'd been friends. She looked inside the car on impulse, and the notebook was under the passenger seat. And she kept it," Ronan said. "She was scared. She read enough of it to understand what it was, and she was terrified." Marcus looked at Victor. "She thought Victor would come for it. She thought if anyone knew she had it—" "I didn't know it existed," Victor said. His voice was barely audible. "I thought Price's people had cleaned everything." Ronan picked up the notebook, opened it. The handwriting was small, precise, the handwriting of someone who was documenting carefully and knew the stakes of what they were recording. Dates in the margins, names underlined, dollar amounts circled. And between the entries, the factual, evidentiary entries, there were passages of something else, something personal. He read one line, just 101. Near the middle of the notebook, dated 3 weeks before Rachel Harrow died. "I keep thinking someone will do the right thing. I keep waiting for the person who will look at this and say enough. Maybe I have to be that person. Maybe that's what this is." He closed the notebook. He looked at Victor. Victor was looking at the table. His hands were flat on the surface, and his head was slightly bowed, and he was breathing in a pattern that Ronan recognized. The slow, deliberate rhythm of a person trying very hard not to break apart in a room full of people. Ronan set the notebook in the duffel bag, zipped it shut. "When Carver gets here," he said, "this goes first." Agent Dana Carver arrived at 2:17 in the morning in a rental car with Texas plates, and the particular energy of a man who had been driving fast for 90 minutes while simultaneously managing a professional crisis of a scale he hadn't anticipated when he woke up that day. He was 44 years old, compact, with a face that was built for patience and eyes that were currently operating well beyond their usual parameters. He came through the front door and stopped and looked at the room. The bikers, the diner owner, the deputy sitting at the corner table, the duffel bag on the counter, and processed it in under 5 seconds. "Creed. Carver. You weren't kidding." "I don't." Carver walked to the counter. Ronan opened the duffel bag and laid it out. The envelope, the USB drives, the laptop, the notebook. Carver put on gloves he'd brought in his jacket and began examining each item with the methodical focus of a man who understood that chain of custody started the moment he touched something and didn't end until a courtroom said it did. He spent 11 minutes with the documents, 7 with the laptop files, 3 with the notebook, though Ronan noticed his hands slowed when he reached the personal entries, the way hands do when they encounter something that isn't just evidence anymore. Then he looked at Victor. Deputy Harrow. Agent, you understand that anything you've said tonight and anything recorded on that phone constitutes a voluntary statement? Yes. You understand that you're implicating yourself in multiple federal offenses? Yes. Are you requesting an attorney? Victor looked at the table, looked at his hands, looked up. Not tonight, he said. Tonight I'm requesting that someone listen. Carver pulled out a chair and sat across from him, and Brick slid his phone across the table, and they started from the beginning. The hours between 2:30 and dawn were the kind that exist outside normal time. They had their own gravity, their own pace, their own rules about what mattered and what didn't. Carver worked the phone between sessions with Victor, making calls to numbers in Washington that Ronan didn't ask about and Carver didn't volunteer. The Department of Justice's Public Integrity Section, the FBI's Judicial Security Division, a number at the U.S. Marshals Service that Carver dialed from memory. By 4 in the morning, a federal operation was in motion. By 4:30, 2 additional agents arrived from the San Antonio field office, both carrying equipment cases and the particular expression of people who had been woken up for something significant and were processing the scale of it in real time. By 5, the sky outside the diner windows had begun its slow transition from black to the dark blue-gray that passes for dawn in January. Not light yet, not really, but the promise of light, the sky's acknowledgement that it had been holding darkness long enough. May made more coffee. She had been making coffee for 5 hours, and she showed no sign of stopping, and nobody suggested she should. The act of it, the grinding, the measuring, the pouring, had become something more than functional. It was the rhythm by which the night organized itself. Every time a pot finished, the room reset slightly, like a clock marking an hour. At 5:15, Ronan stepped outside. The cold hit him immediately. Sharper than it had been, the temperature dropping in the hour before dawn the way it always did, as if the night was making one final effort before it gave way. His breath came in thick white clouds. The parking lot was full. Bikes, federal vehicles, Marcus's truck, and the neon sign above the diner was doing its broken thing, Kati's blinking in intermittent red, and for a moment he stood there and looked at it and felt the particular exhaustion that comes not from physical effort but from emotional expenditure, the specific fatigue of a nervous system that has been running on crisis chemistry for 3 days and is only now beginning to understand that the crisis has a shape it can survive. Brick came out behind him, stood beside him without speaking. They were quiet for a while, long enough for the sky to lighten another degree. Dex's lawyer called back, Brick said. The warrant's legit, but it's a paperwork issue. Failure to appear on a hearing he wasn't properly notified about. His lawyer's filing a motion tomorrow. Should be cleared in a week. Ronan nodded. I called his daughter's mother, Brick continued. Dex doesn't know yet. She's open to him seeing the kid. She said she's been waiting for him to get stable enough to ask. Ronan looked at the sky. He is stable enough. I know, he doesn't. Tell him. I will. When this is over. When he can hear it without it getting tangled up with everything else. They stood in the cold. The blue-gray was lightening. Somewhere east, behind the low line of buildings that constituted Cedar Ridge's main street, the sun was approaching the horizon with the slow, inevitable certainty of something that couldn't be stopped or hurried. You did the right thing, Brick said. Staying. I know. You always know. That's the problem. Brick's voice had something in it that Ronan rarely heard. A roughness around the edges, the texture of emotion in a man who had spent decades keeping his surfaces smooth. You always know, and you do it anyway, and it always costs something, and you pay it, and then you stand in a parking lot at 5 in the morning like it didn't cost anything. Ronan was quiet. It costs something, Brick said. Not a question. It always costs something. Your daughter. Ronan looked at him. Brick was staring straight ahead, at the bikes, at the road, at the line where the dark met the coming light. "Every time you do this," Brick said, "every time we roll into a town and you find someone who's being ground up by a system that doesn't care, you're not just helping them. You're replaying it. You're standing in front of the thing that happened to her and you're saying, 'Not this time.' And it works. It helps people. But it doesn't bring her back. And I watch you look for her and every person we help. And I watch you not find her. And I watch you get on your bike and ride to the next town and start looking again." The parking lot was very still. "I know," Ronan said. "Do you?" "Yes." He looked at his hands. "I know exactly what I'm doing. I've known since the first time, since Amarillo." He paused. "It doesn't change anything. Knowing doesn't change the fact that there are people in diners getting hit by men who are supposed to protect them. Knowing doesn't make me capable of riding past." "I'm not asking you to ride past." "What are you asking?" Brick turned to him. His eyes were bright in the pre-dawn cold, and for the first time in the years Ronan had known him, he could see moisture in them that wasn't from the wind. "I'm asking you to stop punishing yourself for the 6 calls," Brick said. "I'm asking you to consider the possibility that you've paid enough. That she would want you to stop carrying it like a debt, and start carrying it like a—" He searched for the word. "Like a reason to be alive. Not a reason to keep dying a little every time." The words hung in the cold air between them. Ronan felt them land, not in his mind, which had heard variations of this before and knew how to deflect them, but somewhere lower, somewhere in the physical architecture of his body, in the place where the photograph lived and the 6 missed calls lived, and the word concluded lived, and for a moment he felt something shift in that architecture. Not a resolution, not a healing, just a movement, a small tectonic adjustment, like a weight that had been in one position for years finding a slightly different way to sit. He put his hand on Brick's shoulder, held it there for a moment. "Okay," he said. Not a promise, not a transformation, just an acknowledgement that the words had landed somewhere real. Brick nodded once. They went back inside. The arrests happened at 7:12 in the morning. Ronan would remember the time because it was the same time Victor Harrow had walked into the diner 3 days ago and struck May Carter and set all of this in motion. 7:12. The universe had a sense of symmetry even when it had no sense of mercy. A federal task force executed simultaneous warrants at 4 locations: Judge Calvin Price's ranch, the Cedar Ridge County Sheriff's Department, a law office in Austin connected to the financial network, and a county administrative building where records were stored. Carver coordinated from the diner, his phone on the counter, the speaker relaying updates in the clipped, procedural language of federal operations. Price was taken at his ranch. He was awake, had been awake all night, according to the agents, sitting in his study with a glass of something on the desk and the expression of a man who had been waiting. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. He was placed in handcuffs and led out and put in a vehicle and driven away from the property he'd bought with 30 years of corrupted revenue, and the last thing the agents reported seeing as they pulled out of the driveway was the porch light going off, as if the house itself had decided to stop pretending. 4 additional arrests followed in the next 2 hours. County officials, a contractor who had been part of the financial distribution system, a former deputy who had been involved in evidence suppression going back 15 years. Victor Harrow was transported to the San Antonio field office at 8 in the morning in a federal vehicle, accompanied by Carver, with the understanding that his cooperation would be a central factor in how his case was handled. He walked out of the diner without looking back. He didn't say goodbye to anyone. He got in the vehicle, and the door closed, and the car pulled out of the lot, and Ronan watched it go and felt nothing clean about it. No satisfaction, no justice, just the complicated, unresolvable weight of a man who had done terrible things and was now doing the one thing that might begin to offset them, and the knowledge that the ledger of Victor Harrow's life would never balance, not fully, not in any way that brought Rachel back or unburned Marcus's house or unbroken the ribs of Sandra Pruitt's nephew. The notebook went with Carver, in a sealed evidence bag, labeled, logged, initialed. Rachel Harrow's words, finally, in hands that would read them for what they were. Patricia Harrow reached Vermont safely. Her younger son Daniel met her at the airport. She would be contacted by federal prosecutors within the week. Victor's wife, Marlene, had left for San Antonio with the children the night before, following a phone call from Patricia that Ronan never heard the content of but could imagine. A grandmother telling a mother to take her children somewhere safe. The particular urgency of a woman who understood exactly how fast the world her family had built was going to come apart. Sandra Pruitt was contacted by federal agents at her home. She gave a full statement. She cried twice during it, according to Carver, and asked only one question, whether Rachel's family would know she'd kept the journal safe. Carver told her they would. Marcus Webb's documentation was processed into the federal case file on the second day. The digital copies he'd maintained for 2 years, the files that had survived the fire because he'd had the foresight and the fear to scan them and hide them, became foundational exhibits in what would eventually be designated United States versus Price et al. Danny Ortega, who had sold his restaurant and left Cedar Ridge, was reached by phone. He agreed to testify. So did the Feldman family. So did Joel, Sandra's nephew, who was now 21 and working construction in Dallas, and who said, when Carver called him, 4 words that would stay in the case file permanently: "I've been waiting for this." The days after the arrests had a quality that Ronan had experienced before but never gotten used to: the strange, disorienting stillness that follows a sustained crisis. The adrenaline drained, the body remembered it was tired. Sleep came in fragments, heavy and disorganized, the mind processing what had happened in ways that didn't respect sequence or logic. The Iron Wolves stayed in Cedar Ridge for a week, not at the Pine View. The motel had been part of the county's infrastructure in ways that were only now becoming clear, and the owner had quietly cooperated with Harrow's people for years. They stayed instead in rooms above the VFW hall that Marcus arranged, and in the spare room at Marcus's house, and in the diner's back office where May set up a cot and a space heater, and said nothing about it except, "It's there if you need it." Dex called his daughter's mother on the 4th day. The conversation lasted 41 minutes. Ronan wasn't present for it, but he saw Dex afterward, sitting on the back steps of the VFW hall with his phone in his hand and his face carrying an expression Ronan had never seen on it before. Open, undefended, the face of a man who had just been told that the door he thought was closed was unlocked and he could come through it whenever he was ready. Dex's lawyer cleared the warrant on the 6th day. A hearing was scheduled for the following month. Dex would attend. He would bring documentation of his employment and his membership in the Wolves and the monthly payments he'd been sending. He would bring a photograph of his daughter that her mother had texted him, 4 years old, dark hair, laughing at something outside the frame. Ronan saw that photograph once, briefly, when Dex showed it to Lou on the steps of the VFW hall. He looked at it for 2 seconds, and then he looked away because the resemblance, not physical, not specific, just the quality of it, a young girl laughing, captured in a moment of uncomplicated joy, hit a frequency in him that he wasn't prepared for. He went for a walk. Cedar Ridge at dusk in late January was a different town than the one he'd ridden into. Not transformed. That would take longer than a week, longer than a case, longer than any single set of arrests could accomplish. But altered. The way a room is altered when you open a window that's been painted shut for years. The dimensions are the same, the furniture is the same, but the air is different, and the difference changes how everything in the room feels. Businesses that had kept their heads down were beginning to ask questions. The county government was in temporary receivership. An interim sheriff had been appointed from outside the county, a woman named Torres who had driven in from El Paso and who had, in her first public statement, said the words accountability and transparency in the same sentence without making either one sound like a slogan. He walked past the diner. The lights were on. May was inside, moving behind the counter with the efficiency that he'd come to associate with her. Not graceful exactly, but purposeful. Every movement connected to the next in a chain that produced warmth and coffee and plates of food and the specific kind of stability that a place like this could provide when the person running it was no longer operating under siege. The neon sign still said Tsa Ti's. He went inside. Chemt. She was alone. The evening crowd had thinned and the last customer, Pete Dunmore, still in his corner booth, still nursing his cup, had shuffled out 10 minutes before. The diner was quiet in the way that felt intentional now rather than cautious. A chosen quiet. a safe one. She poured him a cup without asking. He sat at the counter. The same stool, the same position, the same angle of light through the front windows, though the light was different now, warmer, the late afternoon catching dust motes in the air in a way that made the room look like it was holding something gentle. "I talked to Lynn today," May said. She leaned against the back counter with her own cup, the same posture she'd held that first morning when she'd told him about Victor. "I told her everything." "How'd she take it?" "She cried. Then she got angry. Then she asked me why I didn't tell her sooner." May looked at her coffee. "I told her I was protecting her. She told me that wasn't my decision to make alone." A small, quiet exhale that was almost a laugh. "She sounds like me, or like the version of me I forgot existed." "She's coming in March." "She's coming next week." May met his eyes. "She changed her ticket. She wants to be here." Ronan held his cup. The warmth of it traveled through his palms and into his wrists, and he let it sit there, the small physical comfort of a hot cup in a warm room at the end of a week that had cost everyone in it something. "The sign," he said, nodding toward the front. May looked at it. The broken neon. Tates. "I called someone to fix it," she said. "They're coming Thursday." "Good." She was quiet for a moment. Then she set her cup down and crossed her arms and looked at him with the expression she used when she was about to say something she'd been considering for a while. "You're leaving," she said. Not a question. "Tomorrow, probably." "Where?" "West. Originally, before the weather." "And now?" He looked at the counter, at the surface where Victor had set his coffee cup that first morning, at the place on the floor where May had knelt with blood on her lip and the room pretending she wasn't there. "West," he said again. "There's a thing in New Mexico, a veteran's family. Brick's been in contact." "Another town. Another situation." She nodded. She didn't look away. "You do this. This is what you do." "It's what we do. All of us. It's why the club exists." She was quiet. Then she reached under the counter and pulled out a small paper bag and set it between them. "Lemon pound cake," she said. "I made it this morning. It keeps for 3 days if you wrap it." He looked at the bag, looked at her. "There's also my phone number in there," she said. "Not because I'm not asking for anything, but if you're ever driving through, or if you need a place where the coffee's good and nobody's going to ask you to explain yourself." He took the bag, held it for a moment. "May." "Yeah." "The booth," he said. "The one by the front window, where you sat when Victor—" "I know which booth. Sit in it." She looked at him, confused. "Sit in it tonight, after I leave. Sit in it with your coffee and look out the window and let it be yours again." He paused. "It's just a booth, but it shouldn't belong to a bad memory." She held his gaze for a long time. Her eyes were bright and her jaw was set in the way it got when she was managing something, but what she was managing now wasn't fear or performance or survival. It was the specific, overwhelming difficulty of being seen clearly by someone who understood what they were looking at. "Okay," she said. He finished his coffee, left money on the counter, stood. She came around the counter and stood in front of him, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then she put her hand on his chest, flat, over the patch, over the place where the Iron Wolves insignia sat on the leather, and held it there for 3 seconds. Not a romantic gesture, not a farewell. Something more specific than either. An acknowledgement, a marking. A woman placing her hand on the thing that had stood between her and the worst of her life and saying, without words, "I know what this cost you, and I will not forget." He put his hand over hers, held it, let go. He walked out. The morning they left was cold but clear, the sky a pale blue that stretched from horizon to horizon without interruption, the kind of Texas sky that makes you feel like you're standing at the bottom of something vast and indifferent and beautiful all at once. The bikes were lined up in the parking lot of the VFW hall, 12 of them, cleaned and fueled, their chrome catching the morning sun in small, hard points of light. The men were around them in the particular pre-departure configuration that Ronan had seen 100 times, checking mirrors, adjusting bags, doing the small rituals of the road that were half practical and half ceremonial. Marcus came to see them off. He stood at the edge of the lot with his hands in his coat pockets and watched them prepare. And when Ronan came to him, he extended his hand and Ronan took it, and they held the grip for a moment longer than was necessary. "Thank you," Marcus said. "You did the hard part. You held the evidence for 2 years. I held it. You used it." Marcus looked at the bikes. "If you're ever—" "I know." Sandra Pruitt was there too, standing near her car at the edge of the road, not quite in the lot, maintaining a small distance that Ronan understood was not reluctance, but the particular caution of a woman who was still learning to be in public spaces without checking for who was watching. She raised her hand once. Ronan raised his back. Dex was the last one to his bike. He'd been on the phone again. The 4th call this week to the woman in Midland. The conversations getting longer each time. The silences in them getting shorter. He pocketed the phone and looked at Ronan, and something passed between them that didn't require language. The specific, wordless exchange of a man who has been given permission to rejoin a part of his life he thought he'd lost, and the man who made sure the door was open. "Ready?" Ronan said. "Yeah." "Then let's go." The engines started, one after another, in the staggered sequence that was their signature. Not simultaneous, not rehearsed, but linked. Each ignition triggering the next in a chain that built from a single rumble to something that filled the parking lot and the road and the cold morning air with a sound that was deeper than any individual machine and more communicative than any individual voice. Ronan pulled out first, then Brick, then the rest, falling into formation with the ease of men who had done this 1,000 times. The bikes moving through Cedar Ridge's main street in a loose column that caught the light and cast long shadows on the asphalt and drew faces to windows and doors along the road. They passed the diner. The neon sign was off. It was morning, the sign only ran at night, but the lights inside were on, and through the front window Ronan could see May behind the counter, moving, working, doing the 1,000 things she did every morning to make the place run. She didn't come to the window. She didn't wave. She was just there, visible, present, the fact of her going about her day being itself the point. A woman in her diner, unafraid, with the lights on. He rode. The county road opened up ahead of them, a straight line through brown winter landscape, heading west, heading toward the next thing, whatever the next thing was. The cold hit his face and his hands, and he let it, the way he always did, because the cold was part of riding, and riding was part of living, and living was the thing he had committed to continuing, despite every reason he'd been given to stop. In his jacket pocket, the photograph. His daughter, laughing. "Dad, stop making that face. I'm fine." She wasn't fine. She never got to be fine. And he would carry that for the rest of his life, in every mile and every town and every room where he crouched down in front of a stranger and offered his hand. But Brick was right about one thing. He could carry it differently. Not as a debt, not as a penance, but as the thing that made him ride toward damage instead of past it. The thing that put him in diners at 7 in the morning. The thing that made him stay. The road unrolled beneath him. The engine hummed. Behind him, 11 bikes held formation, their riders carrying their own damage and their own reasons and their own particular versions of the same fundamental impulse. The need to stand between vulnerability and harm. Not because it fixed what was broken in them, but because the standing itself was the closest thing to meaning that any of them had found. Cedar Ridge fell away behind them. The sky ahead was enormous and empty and patient. Somewhere in that sky, the sun was climbing and the light was changing, and the road was long, and they were on it, together, heading west, carrying everything, leaving nothing unfinished. The engines held their note against the morning air, and the miles unwound, and the cold gave way, degree by degree, to something that was not yet warm but was no longer winter. And that was enough.